He might actually be the most derivative one of all. I mean, Christ, the same house.
Maybe so. But you forgot the first rule of surviving a stab movie. Never answer the...
I'm bored.
Wait!
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking about Ferm your fucking boosh for a second. We're talking only do sober what you do drunk. It will teach you to keep your mouth shut. And we're talking Poutine Weenie on Rue du Jour. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we are talking a crucified T-Rex.
Oh my god, what is that accent? Because I can tell you it's not fucking French-Canadian.
Yes, he who shall not be named, Johnny Depp, is in the film we're talking about today, everyone, which is Kevin Smith's Tusk, which is continuing our month of weird sex. And while there is not really any actual sex in this movie, and we are told that this man does not want to fuck this walrus,
I have questions, I have doubts.
I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about this anomaly of a movie. It is the epitome of how did this get made, especially if you merely mention the premise to someone.
Right, yes. And of course, we have very graphic details about how it got made because it's actually not that hard a story to find.
No, but you will see lots of reviews that are like, well, I guess this is proof that you shouldn't make a movie out of a podcast idea. Meh.
Oh.
Yeah, but
okay, I guess.
But it's okay. So as we mentioned last week, I have seen this and I love this movie. Joe, this is your first time watching it. So on the off chance that you hate this movie and I have to fight you, let's bring in someone who I know is on my side. So everyone, she is a member of the Chicago Film Critics Association with bylines at Rue Morgue, Polygon, and That Shelf. You may also remember her from our previous episode on Raw, way back in 2021. Please welcome back Dede Crimmins.
Oh, hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
So we're going to figure out if we're all walrus yes or walrus no?
I feel like we're all walrus yes.
What?
So
Yeah,
no,
excited.
this movie is a delight. I don't like Johnny Depp in it, but
No.
apart from that, I'm totally walrus, yes.
Okay, I'm shocked. I'm legitimately shocked. I did not think this was going to be a you movie. And the Canadian jokes aside, I thought this was going to be too uneven for you.
You know what? I feel like I had enough forewarning from everybody being like, yeah, it takes a bit of a turn towards the end when Johnny Depp comes in. Also, some of the humor is really juvenile and silly. And I was like, maybe I just need this in my life right now. But Dede, I mean, the reason that you're here is because when you and I were hanging out at Fantasia last summer, you and I were talking, and I mentioned we were programming this, and you practically leapt over the table at me because you were so excited.
If I were more spry, I would have been in your lap. Like, I know. Who said this was a sexless episode? No, I adore this film. It's like one of those weird comfort films. Like, I'll put it on where I just like need something that is predictable and enjoyable. So
predictable and enjoyable. Tusk.
I know. I just love it so much. It's so strange. I love breaking it down. I love, and again, like this is by no means a perfect film for me. I think all the Johnny Depp scenes are dumb and need to be edited out.
No, they are so funny.
They're
Trace
funny,
is a
but it's like,
defender.
okay, sure, apologizer or defender, but no, like if they were like, if the Johnny Depp scenes were like 45 seconds, I'd be like, oh, that was a fun little cameo.
But they go on.
They're so long. Yeah.
Okay, but so even though the scene with him and Michael Parks putting on the
worst accents, it's like a bad accent competition.
Well, but I think Michael Parks putting on some mental deficiencies in his voice. I think he's trying to play a special person.
I also think so.
I think so, because it's just, you can't, it kind of puts him in a safer space. Like, oh, there's no way he has like a chopped up body behind his house.
Exactly.
But also, like, that's not the first time he uses that accent. Like, there's this film, Joe, once you start rewatching it every other week, like, it's just going to make your life that much richer because there's so much stuff hidden throughout it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, that's what I think about a lot of Kevin Smith's films in general. I mean, like, for better or worse, I love a lot of his films. I dislike a lot of his films. I mean, he's only made 14 movies, but he's kind of falls in that Rob Zombie camp for me, where it's like, he is hit or miss for me, but by God, I will always go check out one of his movies because at the very least, I find them interesting.
Yes, I will agree with you on that as someone who often does not like Rob Zombie films nor Kevin Smith films. I usually am like, at least there's going to be something going on there, whether I hate it or like it. It'll be It'll be interesting.
Yeah, because, I mean, one of the things that I find about Kevin Smith, and it is similar to Rob Zombie, is that they have a hand in either the financing or, like, they're almost always original films. They're almost never adaptations. They're often of their own works and that kind of stuff. So they really do feel like a bit of an auteur when they're making a new film. Yeah. And yeah, for better or worse, it's almost always worth checking out because at least they're doing something new and original.
Oh man, I disagree with so much what you just said in terms of how it would apply that, like, I was just thinking Rob Zombie's Halloween, and I, clearly House of a Thousand Corpses is like a giant homage to like all of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So that's where I'm gonna be like, wait, I agree with everything you said except for that bit.
Except for check and check. Yeah.
Do you like Lords of Salem?
I'm fine with Lords of Salem. And having lived in very adjacent to Salem, it's like, yep, that looks exactly like it.
That's your metric.
Exactly. I like the moodiness of it. I think it's quiet in ways that he hadn't done before. I have been on podcasts defending Halloween 2 before. I freaking love that version of it.
Halloween 2 is really good. Halloween 2 is really good.
It's just so weird. But yeah, part of, especially with the Zombie's very early career in directing, I think that he is just doing straight homage, just like Tarantino often does.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So wait, bringing it back then to Kevin Smith, are we in agreement that like his kind of like slacker comedies are the good ones, or the sellout ones are the good ones? Where are we falling here?
Dede, you go first, because I'm really curious to hear your answer.
Oh, I don't know. I would say that, except for I love Tusk so much, and this is like, I mean, I guess it's kind of the perfect marriage of like his love of horror films and his love of slacker, like stoner-ish comedy, even though they don't smoke pot in this, but they do talk. Anyway. Right. Yeah, so I do like, I mean, I love Clerks, but it's also like, it was such a rush seeing a film that looked so crappy and still had people that I could like relate to growing up, and that was certainly like in my sweet spot in terms of my generation there. Yeah. But like his stuff after that's not great. I actually really do like Red State.
Oh yeah, we do too.
Yeah, we actually did a guest episode on Nightmare Junkhead talking about that. And I find that one and Tusk feel, I mean, obviously they were made back to back, but they very much feel like the Kevin Smith trying to break free from his studio jail. And
I have notes on that.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll put a pause in it then.
If and when we get to talk about Yoga Hosers, I despise that film and consider it unwatchable.
I would agree with you on that. No, for me, top tier. So his early period, Chasing Amy is my favorite. I think Chasing Amy is a brilliant non-rom-com since it's Ben Affleck trying to fuck a lesbian. I love Dogma. His perfect film for me is actually Clerks 2. I think Clerks 2, Kevin Smith is really good at injecting heart into his films, and I think that film is the epitome of that. And then with his sellout phase, quote unquote, I actually do enjoy Zack and Mary, even though it's basically Kevin Smith through a Judd Apatow filter.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good description. I do enjoy that one. I don't even mind Jersey Girl.
I think it's fine. It's totally. I never understood the vehement hatred. Like, is it a great movie? No. Like, it's totally like forgettable and passable. But like, I never understood the vitriol that movie got.
I think it's just because it's his big sellout feature, right? It's he's not even Kevin Smith anymore.
Well, okay, so why don't we do this? Let's go through. We have never done a Kevin Smith movie on this podcast before because he only has 2 films that really apply for us. But
yeah.
I'm pulling a lot of this from an interview with Smith that's on the Tusk Blu-ray, which is honestly pretty insightful and a genuinely fun listen. Say what you will about Smith, he is candid.
Right.
So he starts out by talking about, how the less money he has, the more original, but not necessarily better, his film is going to be. So he got his start in 1994 with Clerks, and just to give you a bit of backstory on that, Clerks was shot on black and white 60mm film stock and roughly edited due to a budget of $27,575.
True indeed.
Yeah, well, to acquire the funds, he sold a large portion of his extensive comic book collection in 93, most of which he has since bought back. borrowed $3,000 from his parents, maxed out 8 to 10 credit cards with $2,000 limits, dipped into a portion of funds he got back from his college education, and spent insurance money awarded for a car he and Jason Mewes of Jay and Silent Bob lost in a flood.
Oh my God. Okay.
Even with that said, that budget is what, like 2 Skinamarink? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, more now because of inflation.
Exactly, yeah.
So they shot it in 21 days, 2 pickup days. But anyway, so Miramax, that of Harvey and Bob Weinstein fame?
Infamous, yes.
Yeah. They picked it up and it went on to gross $4.4 million at the box office and becoming a cult classic, essentially funding the next 20 years of Kevin Smith's life. And that's a direct quote from him.
Mm-hmm.
Followed up in 1995 with Mallrats, which was a critical and commercial failure, and followed that up with 1997's Chasing Amy, which is a huge critical success, but not a commercial one. And he kind of talks about, you know, when looking over his film career, he's like, oh, people are always like, oh, make another one of these movies, make another one of these. And he, apparently Chasing Amy is the one that a lot of people are like, do another Chasing Amy. And when making films, he's very much about whatever stage of life he's in. You know, when he made Chasing Amy, he was a very emotionally fraught 26-year-old going through a breakup, and he was very unhappy. And so he's like, I'm happy now. I can't make another one of those movies. Also, happy people don't generally make good art, which I thought was really funny.
I've heard that so many times, and you kind of hear it's true. Like, people make really good art when they're unhappy, but also you shouldn't have to be unhappy to make good art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about it even in horror. Like, I feel like we hit actually, I think I'm being proven wrong now, but I think we, like, during the Trump era, like, we get the best horror in times of political tension.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And there's all new things to be afraid of. Like, new things come about, like, whether it's being, like, trapped inside for hours and months on end. Like, I don't know. It's like you go back to the whole thing about how, like, World War II people were finally coming home from war with not dead and they were missing limbs. So that's like when body horror and like all that Universal stuff cropped up. So there's always like such a really fun parallel. War is not fun, but there's always a really fun parallel between like what's happening culturally and what's happening in horror film, and that I freaking love.
Well, even with Red State, I mean, that's 2011, so that's pre-Trump, but oh my God.
Well, I think it's reading the room, because that one is a mixture of like people turning to conservatism, but also like that movie is very easy for us to cover, Trace, because it's basically about like hate crimes.
Well, and now that it's actually finally getting a new Blu-ray release that's not out of print, we will be able to cover that one day.
There we go.
So yeah, anyway, Smith's career continued. His salary kept going up with films like 1999's Dogma and 2001's Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, but as Smith says, his films weren't any more commercial, even though they were moderate box office successes. So he tries to go really mainstream with 2004's Jersey Girl and 2008's Zack and Miri Make a Porno. And sandwiched between those two was Clerks 2 in 2006. But I guess that's just like kind of a middle ground. But I mean, all of these are like Miramax like pictures. So it's always the Weinsteins handling this. And the Zack and Miri thing is kind of what set him off, where he kind of was like, I'm disillusioned with the film industry. I don't want to do this anymore, because he thought that they marketed it poorly, which attributed to its poor box office. Although Weinstein clapped back saying he spent $30 million promoting it, so I don't know.
Well, if you spend a lot of money, it doesn't mean you're doing a good job.
Exactly. I felt like people had no idea what that movie was. And I mean, Trace, you described it as a Judd Apatow film. And it's funny because I feel like if that movie had come out a little bit later, it almost could have been branded under that, and it probably would have been successful.
Yeah, I think it comes out like 2 months after Knocked Up came out, or maybe it's a year after Knocked Up, if that was 2007.
Yeah, and the Seth Rogen-iness, like...
Yeah.
Well, around this time, so it's like right before Zack and Miri comes out, is when he starts his podcast, Smodcast. But before we get to that, so he cuts ties with Miramax, and he's approached by a Warner Brothers executive who's like, hey, like, you know, you're done with the indie business, you're done with the Weinsteins, why don't you try your hands at directing a studio film? Here is Cop Out.
Oh my God. I forgot he even made that movie.
Because he didn't write it. It's the only film he's directed that he did not write.
Yeah.
But it's the worst reviewed film of his career, but also the highest grossing film of his career.
What does that say about us and Hollywood?
No matter what, he still had a good time on that movie, with the exception of one person, because apparently there was a notorious feud between him and Bruce Willis.
Right.
But anyway, he was disillusioned with the business and put more focus on his podcast, Smodcast. And he did this because he learned that he could live without the movie business. He could make a living just by being Kevin Smith. And so thanks to the touring of the podcast and the TV show, he was able to live comfortably, and to the point where he started wanting to make a horror movie, and that is where 2011's political horror film Red State came about, which he self-distributed with his own money that he made from the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Good for him.
Yeah.
I mean, the goals, the dreams, yes.
All of a sudden, though, the Smodcast episode happened. Episode 259, The Walrus and the Carpenter. And in the episode, Smith, with his longtime friend and producer Scott Mosier, who of course gets a name drop in Tusk for Dr. Mosier, discussed an article featuring a Gumtree ad. Gumtree being a British-based online classified advertisement and community website. So I guess it's like the British Craigslist?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, a homeowner was offering a living situation free of charge if the lodger agreed to dress as a walrus. And so the discussion went on from there, resulting in almost an hour of the episode being spent on reconstructing and telling a hypothetical story based on the ad. And of course, you can go listen to the podcast, or if you made it to the end of the credits of Tusk, you actually hear a snippet of them discussing it in that film as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Smith then told his Twitter followers to tweet #WalrusYes if they wanted to see their hypothetical turned into a film, or #WalrusNo if they did not. And a vast majority of his following agreed that the film should be made. So that's how we got it. But funnily enough,
can you imagine being a listener at this podcast and being like, no, I don't want to see this movie? Like, you just listened to an hour of it. How do you not want to see that realized on screen?
Well, it's interesting that he was talking earlier, too, about, like, oh, people always ask me to make these movies. I'm like, and you keep making them. Like, how many Clerks do we have now?
3.
Mm-hmm.
You let the podcast decide if you're going to make this movie? Like, no wonder people give you their opinion.
Well, and to be fair, though, because he just got Clerks 3 approved because he had to go back to the Weinsteins for Clerks 3 when this was getting made. We just got Clerks 3 last year.
Yeah, that's wild.
So, I don't know. But anyway, the funny fact, though, about the original Walrus post, so it was actually a prank posted by noted Brighton poet and prankster Chris Parkinson, who, upon hearing of the planned film, said he was a big fan of Smith and that he would love to be involved. So Smith hired him as an associate producer on the film.
Wow, nice.
Wow.
Why not,
I
right?
did not know that part of it. I thought that would be a good living situation.
Yeah. So Smith wrote the 80-page screenplay, which I'm like, 80 pages, but you have a 105-minute movie. Okay. He was waiting for Bob Weinstein's approval on his Clerks 3 submission package, and it was originally titled The Walrus and the Carpenter, like the podcast episode. But he changed it to a single-word title, saying, and I quote, "I knew what a movie about a walrus had to be called," which was, of course, Tusk.
Right.
Wow.
But here's the thing. It was going to be produced by Blumhouse, who...
Oh.
By this point, they'd already made a name for themselves with Paranormal Activity 1 through 4, Insidious 1 and 2, Sinister, and The Purge. But due to Smith's expedited timeline for filming, they amicably parted ways. So Tusk was eventually financed by Demarest Films, who gave it a $3 million production budget.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's wild. Here's your Walrus movie. Here's $3 million. But
I don't know, though. Like, on some regards, $3 million is less than an average Blumhouse production. You know, usually we see those in the $7 to $10 million range. So part of me was like, yeah, I get it. It's a very, very weird film, but also in some ways it's a fairly conventional horror film, right? It's somebody who goes to somebody's house where they shouldn't. That person's a weird eccentric and bad shit happens. In this case, it just happens to involve a walrus.
Yeah. Although I guess even like you're right about Blumhouse's normal budgets, but honestly, I mean, Insidious was $1.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
So they grew.
They did. They've grown. They blossomed, really.
So when putting Tusk together, Smith says that it all started with Red State, going as so far as to say that without that film, he never would have gotten to Tusk. It not only showed that he could do legitimate horror, which helped him find funding, but also got him Michael Parks.
Right.
Now, in Red State, as we know, Parks plays a character who is essentially the villainous leader of the Westboro Baptist Church, but the centerpiece of that film is a sermon he gives that I want to say goes on for maybe 10 minutes?
Man, this guy's memory for dialogue is incredible.
He's just such a pro.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because what are most of his lines in this movie but monologues?
Monologues, it's a lot of dates and figures and weird shit. You're just like, I don't even know how he's doing it.
Well, there's even the scene when he's talking about his orphanage, how he was getting raped and stuff as a kid. There was originally going to be an animated sequence to cut away to while he told this story. And that you can actually watch this on the Blu-ray. It's one of the deleted scenes, but Smith was like, he's just so good that I don't want to cut away from him telling this tale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I did end up watching that sequence, and it works really well with an animated interlude, but I also agree with Smith that Parks is so captivating in that speech that it doesn't make sense to cut away from him. You're just like, oh no, you ended up with two really good options, and then you had to pick one.
Well, and that's what he did. He said, I'm just going to take all the religion, the preaching, whatever, out of his Red State character and let Parks just monologue and chew the scenery, which is exactly what he does. He also lets Johnny Depp do the same thing. So
yeah, that's not good.
It's like, maybe you needed a better actor.
So I looked it up. So my the critics organization I was in 2014, on my ballot that year, I had Michael Parks' performance as my second best male supporting performance of the year.
Oh, yes, Dede.
Doing the work. Thank you.
Yes. This is the service I offer to society.
But also, though, unlike Red State, Tusk had a conventional theater release with distribution handled by none other than A24. That
It's crazy. Also, I looked it up, and this was the 12th film that they distributed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So this is
pretty
like
early days for them.
Early days for them.
I was trying to think, like, when did A24 become A24? The Witch is A24, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if maybe it was that time frame is when A24 started becoming a thing, and then maybe Hereditary sealed the deal.
Right. I mean, we walked through these when we did our YouTube episode on A24 horror, and I do think it was like into the teens that they really came about.
Yeah.
Mid to late teens.
Well, principal photography began on November 4th of 2013 and wrapped 18 days later on November 22nd, with 2 days being reserved for Johnny Depp. The starting date was delayed from September to November because filming was moved from Canada, the authenticity of it, to North Carolina.
The tax breaks.
Yeah, probably so. Smith had planned on premiering the film at Sundance in 2014, but because the dates got pushed back, it couldn't do Sundance. So it had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 6, 2014, where it was screened as part of Midnight Madness, and, in fact, was named first runner-up in the Midnight Madness People's Choice Award, first place going to What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which, I agree with that. That's
tough to beat that.
It was released in theaters on September 19th, 2014, and was declared a box office bomb, earning only $846,000 from over 600 screens. Its opening weekend, debuting in 14th place. By the end of its run, it had grossed $1.8 million and 21,000 overseas for a worldwide total of $1.85 million.
But also that theater count is extremely low. Like
only 600? That's nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to justify this and say like, oh, like plenty of movies have done bigger numbers in smaller numbers of theaters. But at the same time, like when you say, oh, it's a huge box office flop, and you're like, well, it also only played in a few places.
Well, so that's the thing. So first weekend, 602 theaters. Second weekend, 449 theaters. Third weekend, 86 theaters. So
never had a chance then.
Hey, your boy Trace did his part. I saw this shit in theaters opening weekend, and it is one of the most memorable theatrical viewing experiences I've had just because of the audience reactions to this movie. Because it was one of those really tiny 4-row theaters at the Alamo Drafthouse. So it was a very intimate setting where you could hear everyone.
I saw it. The press screening in Boston was press only. And 2 rows in front of me, my good friend Sam started dry heaving at one point. What? And I was like, this is cinema, guys. Like, this is what it's all about.
This is what we do it for.
This is why I'm here. Like,
that is too funny. I don't find anything about this movie. Like, nothing about this movie shocked me. And maybe it's just because I'm coming to it so late. I've seen pictures of Justin Long in the suit. But, I mean, I think it's still really effective when you get the reveal and you get to see him moving in it. Like, it's very different than just a still image. But at the same time, I'm like, we're horror fans. We've seen worse than this, people. Come on.
But we've never seen anything like this before.
Maybe there's that.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I wanted to go see this because I was like, I have to know what this, is he actually going to make him a walrus? I don't know. 'Cause I kept thinking Smith was going to pull his punches with the horror. And when we get that first walrus reveal, and again, I said this to you earlier, Joe, where it's really funny because you get the reveal and it is shocking. And it's really, honestly, I find it actually upsetting. But then Smith does this like rapid fast zoom out that also adds like a bit of a punchline of comedy to it.
Because he looks like he's in a fucking zoo. Yeah, it's wild.
Oh, and later he is. But yeah, I love the dread in this film. Like, we can get into it at some point. But just like, it's just Michael Parks being like, no, there's a brown recluse, like the whole time. And it's like, just putting yourself in Justin Long's shoes and being like, what do you do? What do you if someone's like, oh yeah, the doctor said you can't have your phone? Like, you can't argue your way out of that.
Yeah.
No, he's being gaslit, which again is like, I mean, I know gaslighting isn't an exclusively sexual thing, but this feels like Michael Park being like, haha, I got you. Now I can do whatever I want with you.
The moment he starts singing Itsy Bitsy Spider, again, it's funny, but it's also so fucking terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when he's singing Itsy Bitsy Spider, that's when he's using the accent that he uses with...
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe that's his only go-to character. Maybe it's an alter ego. We don't know.
Maybe.
We don't know.
Well, unfortunately, if he's dead, but like if he was still alive, we would get a prequel of the life of Howard Howe.
Oh my god, I want that. I want that so hard.
So Tusk was, again, I feel like the general consensus, at least on film Twitter, is that this is a bad movie. I feel like I see people a lot of times talk about how much people hate it and how they hate it. It was met with mixed reviews. I mean, it's 45% of Rotten Tomatoes, so it's not like a super high thing. We got an average rating of 5.6 out of 10, Metacritic of 55 out of 100, and Letterboxd users have given it a 5 out of 10. So again, it's the definition of polarizing, right?
Yeah, firmly down the middle.
So for negatives, I mean, there's just a couple of snippets. You know, we've got the most disgusting and pointless movie I've ever seen. Emphasis on pointless. I spent half the movie sick to my stomach. And
yes, that's the point. That's the point. They found the point.
Unless he was sick to his stomach about how bad the movie was.
Well, I saw someone say, this is reprehensible. I can't form images in my mind, but I'll be haunted by the lack of images in my mind forever thinking about this movie. I was like, people are nonsensical when it comes to the reactions.
I love that. Yeah. No, I don't love that, but I'm just like, you don't need images. Kevin Smith gave you images.
Right? You can rewatch them. They're freely available.
Images in this movie. We've got the worst movie of 2014. One of my favorite. The film kills irony.
What?
I don't know. I don't know.
Our current political system killed irony.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the flip side, though, we've got a major return to form for Smith and an exciting new chapter in a career that now feels totally reinvigorated. Again, coming off of, like, Cop Out, and, like, no one saw Red State at the time, so, you know.
Right.
Funny, strange, disquieting, and occasionally gory, Tusk is Kevin Smith at his best, which is a Variety quote, by the way.
Ooh.
Richard Roper. I'm recommending Kevin Smith's uniquely twisted Tusk, but there's a part of me that wishes I could unsee it. Over the last 15 years, I've seen thousands of movies, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've actually closed my eyes during a screening because I needed a quick 3-second break.
Wow. I can't believe A24 couldn't use that to sell this film better.
I know! But honestly, I mean, here's the thing, though. This isn't really a movie that's like, I feel like Smith's normal audience would have gravitated toward because it's a horror film. And I think that because it's a genre fans weren't going for it because they were like, it's a dumb Kevin Smith movie about a walrus.
Right. Yeah, and also, like, I mean, not that enough people saw the film for them to be that aware of it, but like people who are laughing with Kevin Smith but never at him are going to be kind of like quasi-attacked by some of the characters in this film and how awful they are.
Yeah.
So, I mean, had more people seen it, like I think we could make the argument of the fact that just didn't land well and with the audience and they didn't want to be criticized, but not enough people saw it to have it be like in the zeitgeist that way.
But that being said, though, I mean, like, Smith is like, you know, at the end of the day, like, I want my art to make someone feel something, and people are going to love this movie, they're going to hate it, but they will probably still be talking about it in 50 years. And I mean, we're only 9 years removed, but I can tell you that if people haven't seen this movie, they at least know what this movie is.
I cannot wait to be 90 and still talking about this movie.
I can't wait to be 90 and also be a walrus.
Honestly, okay, the grossest image to me in this movie is it's whenever he's doing the walrus fight at the climax, and it's like his head almost goes into his body for a brief second.
Yes.
It is the grossest thing.
Yes, like his neck retreats into his neck.
It's like a turtle.
It's so good. It's so good. For me, it's every time he has to eat a raw fish.
It's pretty gross. I actually wanted like close-ups of him doing it. Kevin Smith keeps cutting away from it. I'm like, no, show it. I want to see Justin Long biting into this mackerel.
And he still has his human teeth with the tusk snack. Oh,
but
man, so
I think
good.
I think that's why he can't do a close-up, though, because I don't think there's any feasible way that Justin Long could eat this fish with those tusks on his mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, just dedicate yourself to the art, man, and eat that fish.
Find a way. Life finds a way.
He's in the fucking suit, borderline dialogueless for the last 30 minutes of this movie. So
it's one of his best performances.
Wow. I don't know if that's a slight against Justin Long or you just think this performance is great.
I mean, it could be both, right?
It could be both.
No, I mean, also, like, the fact that we're talking about a Justin Long horror film, and he's like, there's been like a common discussion, I feel like, ramping up a little bit on Twitter and film Twitter about like, oh wait, I don't want to say Scream Queen because he can be his own thing, but like, oh wait, he's actually great and he chooses really good, weird movies. Like, this is not a bad thing.
Justin Long has always done this. Like, I don't know why people are suddenly rediscovering him. I'm like, bitch has been out here doing the work for ages.
Well, I'm like, maybe it's because he was a Mac, like, not a PC. Like, was that it? Like,
no, he did that. I mean, he was going back and forth between like, I mean, he's done mostly comedy. I mean, he got to start doing like, you know, Ted, that TV show, because that's how my parents always called him. Was, oh, he's the boy from Ted. Ed. He's the boy from Ed.
I was like, Ted? No, sweetie, that's the talking teddy bear movie.
Yes, no, sorry, the boy from Ed. That was the Julie Bowen. God damn it, it was like an NBC show or something. Nevertheless, but his horror. I mean, he's got Jeepers Creepers, which unfortunately, like, no one talks about anymore. Mm-hmm. But then this, and of course, he did Barbarian last year, and then I think, Drive Me to Hell. He did Drive Me to Hell.
Yeah, yeah. But he was also like one of the boyfriends in The New Girl.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, Dede and I saw him last summer when we were at Fantasia in House of Darkness, the Neil LaBute film, which would play exceedingly well with this movie because he's a piece of shit misogynist in that movie as well, and it's a lot of two-person conversations.
Well, so he's kind of making a name for himself, though, playing characters like this.
Yeah, he plays Cads really well.
I mean, he is a good guy in both Jeepers Creepers and Drive Me to Hell, but yeah, this House of Darkness and Barbarian, he's a huge piece of shit.
He looks good in like a suit that's been on too long. Like, you just need to like loosen the collar a little bit. Like, that's a good look for him. Yeah, like someone who's sold out and wants to stay that way, but is still not a good person inside.
I mean, the problem is that he's one of the people you should hate, but he also looks like a fuckboy. Like, he's selling me on this mustache. I was ready to take a ride on it, and this character is garbage.
Mr. Mustache?
Mr. Mustache.
There are very few redeeming qualities, if any, about Mr. Wallace Brighton in this movie.
So true.
But anyway, okay, that's how Tusk got made. So let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. Okay, so we open in the studio because, folks, this is a podcasting horror movie, so I feel seen. Man, Haley Joel Osment laughing is really annoying in this movie. What?
It feels so forced. He's laughing at something that's not funny.
He's laughing, like, they're never that funny. Like,
no.
And it happens in a couple different places where he's like laughing so hard he can't breathe, and it's like, what? Like, no, what am I missing here? Like, I want to have fun like they're having fun, but I just can't. It's not funny.
Well, but that's the thing, though, is like, is this supposed to be like Smith riffing on himself, or is he just trying to make a parody of podcasters in general? Because I feel like it's the latter.
I feel like it's both. Like, we're very much taking down a certain type of entitled white dude, and like, these guys are pieces of shit.
Yeah.
Also, though, I mean, Haley Joel Osment doesn't have a lot to do in this movie, but I actually do. His career, like, in the past 15 years, is just a very interesting beast.
It's wild.
I don't know how he picks movies, but good for him.
Yeah.
It's like watching his career trajectory and then watching like Frankie Muniz become like a race car driver. You're just like, how did these child actors get to where they are now? It's so incredible.
They're doing their thing. But I was going to say, to your point, Trace, like, I do think that it is both Kevin Smith making fun of himself and making fun of these dickbag, like, podcasters who aren't that funny and have a huge following and just make all their money from telling like stupid, racist, whatever. They call themselves a Nazi like party. Like, are you kidding me?
That is hilarious to me. But that aspect of Smith, though, his willingness to make fun of himself is another reason why I find him so endearing.
Yeah, but like the film is bookended by like two, I'm assuming, white dudes just laughing on a mic at something that, I mean, sorry, like,
Yeah.
Tusk is brilliant, but like they're just laughing about this thing, and it's just like, oh, now I get it. Like this is, I don't want to say it's literally putting a mirror on them, but it is.
It is.
You know, figuratively putting a mirror back at not only the characters in the film, but the audience themselves, being like, do you like this? Because this is what would come out of it if those two dudes made a movie.
Well, and that's the thing, too. Like, with Kevin Smith films, it's almost like, I almost never treat any of them as films. They're almost always like, this is just Kevin Smith got a bunch of his buddies and shot things. And as a director, I don't think he's, like, the best. I mean, I think his framing is kind of flat and boring. But I do think he is mostly a good writer when he's not doing Canada jokes. But I don't know. I just, like, it... I almost cut a lot of this some slack because I'm like, yeah, it's just a guy having fun because he has some money. Like, whatever, man. I would do the same fucking thing.
Well, I feel like he's approachable. Like, he feels like an everyman who has suddenly gotten the budget to make massive movies. I mean, the budgets are not that big, let's be clear.
Yeah.
But he has that kind of workman stock to him, right? Like, he could be your friend who was playing around with a camera and now suddenly is making movies with the Weinsteins. And it feels like he's managed to maintain that candidness, that approachability, even late into his career. It's just a question of, you know, he's still super privileged. He's a white dude who is not afraid to make jokes about really offensive shit. And then he kind of does the, shucks, I know what I'm doing, but I kind of made you laugh, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. And to our earlier point, like, it is just, I'm assuming to a certain degree, it is just him hanging out with his friends making these movies.
Yes.
And sometimes it hits and sometimes it really misses.
Right.
So, like, it's, you know, lucky that we get them when we do and they work out, but it doesn't mean that this is like a formula for like brilliance constantly or consistently, I should say. Yeah.
No.
It's like, oh, this worked out. The next one did not. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm still waiting for Moose Jaws. I'm sorry.
Ooh, boy. We'll talk about it when we get there. Yeah, so we're introduced to the two podcasters behind the Not See Party podcast. Ha ha, ha ha ha. So yes, this is Wallace, Justin Long, as well as Teddy, Haley Joel Osment, and our introduction to them is they are laughing at a video of the Kill Bill kid, who is obviously based on the Star Wars kid, who was popular on YouTube at the time. This character is played by Doug Banks, and we can see him cutting off his own leg with a katana sword, and they find it hilarious.
Would this still be on something like YouTube if someone actually cut their leg off on camera?
Oh yeah. I mean, how many times have we seen
possibly.
people like fall and hit their face and break their nose?
Well, yeah,
like...
but I just feel like there's like a standards and practices of YouTube where they'd be like, this is actual gore and violence that we're going to remove from our platform.
I think they'd be okay with the gore and violence. It's a question of whether or not the parents could get it removed because it's a minor.
There's that too. I'm always just like, even
Dede's
if I
like, downfall of society.
No. You do you. But I'm also just like, if I were recording myself doing anything like this and that's how it ended, I would not upload it. Like, that would be one of those things. There might be a recording of it, but it would stay with me. So I guess if I do chop my own leg off with a katana sword, like, this is for like my own viewing. But this kid at some point uploaded it and felt the need to share it with everybody.
Well, but
Right,
they say
or maybe
he's
friends,
famous
yeah.
now. He has more hits than the Nazi Party does.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Which is a sad condemnation, right?
Yeah, and this is my whole, like, just because I'm getting the impression that I've rewatched this film more than you guys, maybe this week, maybe for my entire life. But the fact that he's just like, I'd chop my leg off if I could be famous. And it's like,
Right.
I see what's going here. Oh, wait, are we going to talk about this later? And are you going to lose a leg? Like, ding.
Ding.
Well, and it's like a slight, but it's a commentary still on this type of culture. And this is coming 3 years after Scream 4 did the exact same thing?
Oh, yeah, because in some ways I feel like the internet was still a bit of a Wild West at this point. Like, we had obviously had it for more than a decade, like, very accessible, everybody's using it. And yet I think people were starting to find ways to become famous in the late 2000s and into the early 2010s. So it was kind of like, oh, how do you monetize stupid shit so that you can become famous? And again, like, commentary on Kevin Smith, because he literally said, I could make this movie because I could just do a podcast and live off of it.
But at the very least, though, this film brought him back into the film industry, because if this movie wouldn't have happened,
Right.
he may not still be making movies today.
Yeah.
He'd just be podcasting and selling merch.
Yep.
Okay, so after this video, we get our title card, and then we see that Wallace is en route to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Yes, that is in Canada. It's the middle of the country. This is where the Kill Bill kid is from, so he's going to interview him for this week's episode.
But first...
we've got people to visit. So he is schooled on Canada Don'ts, or Canadon'ts, by border agent... That's, I guess, the character's name, played by Harley Morenstein. And I 100% thought that this was Ethan Embry with bad facial hair.
So, Joe, do you find this scene funny at all?
No, there's nothing about this scene that's funny. This is sad Canadian humor. Like, the hockey jokes are so basic. And then this idea that we don't get sad, I'm like, shall I talk to you about our seasonal effectiveness disorder because we don't get a ton of sun in various parts of the country? No, it's generalizations. It's very boring to me as a Canadian.
Yeah, I mean, as an American, I think, what, you say this, me offline to me, we're like, South Park has been doing this for 25 years. So it's like, and all of these jokes, I mean, I find them, like, cute, but I don't find them funny, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, like, I'm not outraged. I'm not exasperated by them. I'm just kind of like, all right, fine. Let's move it along. Move it along.
But it goes on for like 5 minutes.
Yeah. A lot of scenes do overstay their welcome in this. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that in a little bit.
Tighter edit,
yeah. But I like seeing Wallace interact with other people and see the, like, he's just awful, like, all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say, like, full stop, because I hadn't seen this in a couple of years. It's been at least 2 years since I've rewatched this. I had this as an 85-minute movie or an 88-minute movie in my mind. And so when I looked at the box and I saw it was 105 minutes, I was like, I was worried it was not going to hold up. And it did. But it's still like, there is a very good 88-minute movie in here.
Yeah, I didn't find the pacing was terrible. I think, like you, Dede, I was keeping an eye out, and certain scenes just felt a little like an SNL sketch where we let them run one or two jokes longer than they maybe needed to be. But it wasn't so egregious that I was looking at my watch, kind of tapping my foot, okay, can we please just move it along? It's like, okay, that could have been shorter, but it's fine.
I think it's because, though, like, he keeps... I don't even know if I agree with all the editing decisions in this movie, specifically like where he places scenes, but I think what makes this not feel as long is because he keeps changing things. I mean, whenever we get to Allie's, like, you know, to the camera monologue about her life, it's like, what is this?
Where is this coming from? I legit thought it was going to be a reveal that she was an actress and she was filming an audition.
She was running lines. Yeah. No, as much as I think certain scenes go on too long, I never feel like the film drags or like I'm like checking my watch or my phone or anything. I'm more just like, oh, there's so much else good going on in this film. I want to get back to, like, the Walrus Pit. Like, I don't want to talk to Johnny Depp anymore.
Speak for yourself.
We will get there. We have a long way to go before we can get there. Okay. So he dodges a call from, girlfriend Allie, who is played by Genesis Rodriguez, and then he arrives at what he discovers is Kill Bill Kid's funeral, which I thought was a pretty good reveal.
Well, so he dies by suicide. I was like, oh my god, did he kill it? But no, he did it by accident.
Which, honestly, considering this is an A24 film, I'm going to just choose to read this as some kind of foreshadowing of what happens to Pete Davidson in Bodies, Bodies, Bodies.
Oh, there you go.
That, like, the fact that he, again, like, Wallace is so clueless, and he walks up and he's like, hey, like, shouting to the people in the funeral, and they're all crying around the wheelchair, like...
I'm sorry, the wheelchair with the kid's portrait sitting in the seat.
Yes. Again,
terrible.
Not the first, but not the last wheelchair we'll see.
Oh my god.
So many wheelchairs in this movie.
So many mobile people.
Right. Okay, so obviously there will be no interview with this child because he is dead. So Wallace basically drowns his sorrows by visiting Bar H, and in the bathroom he finds a handbill by one Howard Howe, played by Michael Parks eventually, but the letter catches his attention because it's just so out there. Like, why is this here?
And it's like handwritten, like very good penmanship.
it's like, I'll give you room and board if you listen to my stories.
Yes.
Like, okay.
Which, as a podcaster who tells stories, like, this is catnip. You can totally understand why Wallace falls for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also that being said, like, everyone has encountered someone who's maybe a little older, lives by themselves, and they just want to talk to people.
Oh, yeah.
So it's
Absolutely.
like someone acknowledging that, like, it's a little weird, and like, I would be intrigued, but I would not call that number. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Well,
oh, sure.
I would call that number if I had at least one other person by my side.
Right,
Yes,
or you were
yes.
going during the day, but of course the conditions of his visit in Canada is that he was going to do the interview, turn around, and fly out the next day, so he doesn't have the time to wait. So when he calls this guy and says, oh, you can come tonight, we can do this, Wallace is hitting the road.
There
But first, he does need to stop and get directions from a local convenience store, so introduce the yoga hosers, as they will eventually become known. So they are played by Harley Quinn Smith, yes, Kevin Smith's daughter, as well as Lily Rose Depp, yes, Johnny Depp's daughter, Nepo babies.
I will
in the
tell you
convenience
this. So
store.
it has taken me a while, because I think they're fine here. This scene is not necessary, but, well, I guess it kind of is, because we get the cup later, but...
I would argue you could actually just do the second version of this, because that one feels like a longer redux of this.
Yeah, I can see that. Both Harley Quinn Smith and Lily Rose Depp, I have not been impressed by until one particular thing for each of them. Because Harley Quinn Smith also, like, he really makes her the centerpiece of the Jay and Silent Bob reboot. Because she plays Jay's daughter, I think. I don't think it's very good or funny. He does wrap up Chasing Amy storylines in Jay and Silent Bob reboot, which is fantastic. But the movie as a whole is kind of meh. But I think Harley Quinn Smith is really, really, really good in, oh my God, Cruel Summer.
Okay. Yeah,
and I think that Lily Rose Depp is really good in Silent Night.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But and those are more recent things, but everything before those two things, I've always been kind of like, okay. Like, here you go. And Yoga Hosers is, yes, nigh unwatchable.
And being performative Canadians here.
Right.
Yeah. Like yeah.
Yeah. Naturally, we got to work in a boot. Always got to go for the boot. But that's
okay. But I will say, though, I do laugh every time at Chug a Lug.
Yes.
I mean, here's the thing. There is good humor scattered throughout this film. Like, I would argue, even though I don't particularly like Johnny Depp's performance, many of his lines I found very funny, which is kind of what gets me through that back half. But there's sprinkles of funny stuff all throughout this movie. Even the Wallace stuff where I'm like, oh, I shouldn't laugh because it's offensive and stupid, but I am kind of laughing.
Well, and yeah, I think as we get into that back up, we can talk about how the film handles its tonal shifts more.
Right. Okay, so we hit the road. It's about a 2-hour drive to get to Bifrost, which is where Howard Howe lives. And Wallace arrives at this isolated mansion. He lets himself in, which I thought was very odd.
Right?
Entitled
Okay.
white man.
Yeah, he's very forward, obviously. He doesn't have a care in the world. He doesn't even consider what he might be walking into. So Howard welcomes him to this very ornately decorated house. Like, the production design on this house is just filled with interesting details. There's always something to look at in whichever room they're in. And Howard offers him some brandy-soaked tea. And any horror fan immediately goes, oh no, don't drink the tea.
Never drink tea. Never drink tea.
Like, between this and Get Out, like, in modern history, like, no.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake back in 2003. Don't drink the fucking tea.
Tea.
Yeah. So they begin to exchange backgrounds and they're kind of telling stories. Like, they're getting to know each other, but it's almost exposition storytelling because we're getting a sense of their personalities and their backstories. So Wallace, and just in case we didn't realize he was a really bad dude, he manages not one but two different stories about female relatives where he basically is just insulting them or saying how terrible they are. And you're like, okay, so chalk up the misogyny. There we go.
I love but one of my favorite line deliveries from him is when he's like, you remind me of my mother. Wally, what are you doing? Oh, she's the worst. You're fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, Long's ability to spin lines that have like a completely different tone is very good in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But he is superseded, I think, by Parks in his delivery of he's like, walrus cock, I'm a naughty boy, aren't I?
Mm-hmm.
And there's also like certain, I can't remember the exact lines right now, but there's certain things where Michael Parks is like digging kind of at Wallace, and he is totally oblivious. Like he's just like, I'm a white charming dude and you're kind of laughing at my jokes. And he like, it wouldn't even occur to him that this guy would at all be like, oh my God, gotta look at this asshole.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, I mean, I can't remember the exact moment I noticed it, but Howard is also in a wheelchair. Like, eventually we'll start to get close-ups on him, like, using the kind of finger...
The joystick.
Thank you, the joystick to negotiate around the room and stuff. But initially, I didn't even realize it. And then, of course, there's the moment where he stands up and you're like, oh,
that's
shit.
the reveal.
Oh my God, I love that.
What is it? What does he call him? He's like, you're a rapscallion of the highest order, Mr. Brighton.
Yeah. And of course, Wallace is like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting in this whole exchange is it comes across how well read and well educated both of them are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, Wallace, why are you like this? Like, you don't need to be like this. Like,
Yes.
yeah, they're just like, the rhyme of the ancient mariner or something like that, and they both like can quote it. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, you could have been so much more interesting than you are.
Yeah, he's debased himself for the likes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think, too, this scene, because again, like in a quote-unquote normal horror film, and guess what I mean by that? I don't even know. But like, this film takes its time, and we were just watching two men talk for a good amount of this movie's runtime.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Kevin Smithism, because Kevin Smith, what he does is he's really good at writing dialogue. I mean, hit or miss, but like he writes dialogue. That is his forte, having two people go back and forth. That's how Clerks it was, and it keeps going. And we get in this horror film, but then the dread that you mentioned earlier, Dede, that's already kicked into play here. And so we have this conversation as we just feel more and more uncomfortable with the length of time this scene goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and like when when Michael Parks Howard finally starts talking about the walrus, and then that's right when Justin Long starts being like a little sleepy.
Oh yeah, I love the gradual, like you can just see him like just getting sleepy. He didn't care. He's like, whatever, I'm fine. I've never been roofied before.
I know, right? Yeah. Yeah, he's probably roofied people before, but I don't think he's been on the other end of that.
For sure. Mm-hmm. This character's twin is Barbarian.
Maybe it's the same cinematic universe.
I'm going to choose to believe that, because they're both horror films directed by comedians.
Mm-hmm. So before we get the walrus talk, we do have the first black and white flashback as Howard talks about meeting Ernie Hemingway during Operation Neptune. And in these flashbacks, we see that he is being played by Matthew Shively. I'm curious, what do you two make of this creative decision? Because obviously there's like an old mariner tale, as you mentioned, Dede. Like they recite it, but it's also very much Howard is a kind of like sea captain who is on the hunt for his not great white whale. I mean, he does say that's how he got stranded, but he's on the hunt for his great walrus. So sorry, question was, how do you feel about the black and white sequences?
I mean, to me, because he reads very much as Quint from Jaws in these early scenes, so it almost feels like Smith is paying homage to Jaws, but then being like, oh, but Spielberg didn't offer a cutaway to the flashback, so let me do that.
Also, I love that you're like, yeah, Quint from Jaws, not, Captain Ahab, who Quint is based on.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of fine with them. I think they have a certain degree of charm and kind of add to the playfulness of it. Because they're not done in like a super serious, grimy way. It's just kind of like, oh,
They feel like an old film reel to me.
Yeah, like they could be like dancing a jig and it just is like this little hint of whimsy, and I'm kind of okay with that. Mm-hmm. And also, it does make him seem less threatening, because it's like, oh, look at him as a kid, like he's fine. Oh, and now he's in a wheelchair, nothing's gonna happen.
I mean, unfortunately, if you're aware of the premise of this movie, you're automatically like, well, he's drugged.
The shackles are already raised.
Yeah, exactly. Although I've actually never shown this to someone like without warning, and I kind of want to do that now.
Yes. You just have to find a victim.
I went into this pretty blind because I don't watch trailers, and it was one of those like, Kevin Smith, I see, fangs on the cover, I'm in. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't quite entirely understand exactly what was going to happen in terms of like the physical transformations. And I think that's where I get my most like glee from in watching this. So yeah, but no, it would be great. I have this thing where it's like if you show someone a movie that you love, then you watch them watching the movie, and that is so annoying for everybody.
Oh no! Trace is the opposite. He loves watching people discover his films.
Yes! Oh my god.
I love it, but I telegraph everything. I'm like, oh, guys, it's coming up.
Oh,
like,
no.
Yeah, no, I'm not a good person to do that with.
So I don't do that, but my husband hates that I do. So if I'm watching, if I'm showing someone, because we've shown people like the Scream franchise so many times, where it's like non-horror fans, like, oh my god, like watch Scream, please. But I will literally pause the movie at random points and be like, who do you think the killer is right now?
Oh no, that is annoying. Don't do that.
Yeah, I got on a tear right at the beginning of the pandemic where I kept showing people the apple. Like to the point
where yes, the apple! Oh my god, yes.
So I just like kept like every time like I would have like a virtual movie night with friends, I'm like, guess what's on Amazon? And so I watched it like 3 times in a month with different groups of people, and that was easier to watch them watching it.
Right. Dede, I got appled because I used to have like it was a monthly movie night with friends, and we had we would pick themes, and so everyone pick a theme. We all had different tastes. Bring a movie that fits the theme, and one of our themes one month was just weird, and someone brought the apple.
I mean, appropriate. It fits the bill.
I'd never heard of it, and y'all just Google the apple. Like, it is hilarious.
Also has a very similar plot to parts of Eurovision, the Fire Saga, like scene for scene when they show up at the party, basically. But yeah.
Man, the apple, delightful. What a fucked up movie.
I got appled.
You got appled. Can someone be? Well, I think I referenced Joe getting tusked in an email earlier. But it was not the same thing.
I'm doing the thing Haley Joel Osment does where I'm just laughing, but I promise y'all my laughs are genuine.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as Wallace looks around this room, yes, he does see a walrus dick, and naturally the first thing he does is simulate jacking it off.
Yeah.
And Howard then reveals that he was saved by a walrus. That's why he feels an affinity for them. So while he was on this boat, it hit an iceberg, he was in the water, and he was saved by a walrus that he lived with for 6 months. It was his best companion, and he called it Mr. Tusk.
But go ahead, dude.
I was gonna say, but it's after Mr. Tuskegee. Like, as if he's, like, making the argument that, like, this was not, like, a walrus pre-made name. Like, I have a cat toy in my house named Mr. Squirrel, and it's not referencing anything else but the fact that it's a squirrel.
Right. Like, you called him Mr. Tusk because he's a walrus with tusks.
Yeah. You're
ridiculous.
For years after seeing this in theaters, because I used to see this with my husband in theaters, he would just be like, is it Mr. Tusk? Like, he'll just randomly, I'll be like, what is this person? He's like, it's Mr. Tusk.
If someone asks you, that means that they're drugging you.
God.
Which is exactly what happens to Wallace. So he makes the realization he's been drugged. We then get this kind of dream / flashback where he's getting a blowjob from his girlfriend, Allie, and she stops in the middle because she wants to come on this trip to Canada with him. So this is only like the previous day or something. And long story short, she basically bemoans the fact that he is now doing cringe attack humor, but he justifies this with the success that he has found as quote-unquote new Wallace. So he has made a recent transformation into someone who is doing this kind of shock jock humor, and she just talks about how she misses the old him, but only after he mocks her Latino accent.
Oh.
Well, it's also like he doesn't listen to her words at all.
No.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny though, because I can tell you the exact type of person Wallace is, right? He's like that little. He says the Wallace you fell in love with was an unfunny little dickhole who made Star Wars jokes or whatever the fuck. It's like, oh, so you're the nerd who was bullied a lot in school, who got famous and got rich, and is now become an even bigger bully than the people who bullied you to begin with.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
and like there's that one really kind of sad, sweet throwaway line where he's like, old Wallace didn't have a pot to piss in, and she's like, old Wallace had me. And it's like, yeah, could you stop talking shit so much about the person I fell in love with? Also, It's not a great sign for anyone's psychology or psychological mental state if they're talking about themselves like two different people.
Right.
Like that for me is a bit of like a, oh, this is, I mean, there's ego there, but oh my God, yeah, all the flags flying all over.
And I'm not generalizing about the entire gay male community, but I see a lot of this with queer people where it's like, oh yeah, they were bullied a lot as kids, and then they found like they're people, they found their place, and they've kind of become enormous online assholes and bullies, and so that's my queer connection with this scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the weird thing is that Wallace definitely feels justified in his recent decisions, but the things that he's attributing are financial and notoriety, right? Like,
Right.
He's got a living human being that he wants to sexually pleasure him. He's like basically lambasting her because she won't finish the blowjob and she's leaving him hanging. And she's trying to tell him, hey, I don't like who you are. Like, I miss you as a human being. And he's like, that person's gone. Also, please finish giving me head so I can come. You're just like, Allie, girl, get the fuck out of here.
Okay, I guess, so question for y'all. Do y'all like how these bits, there's bits of information about Allie specifically? So this is our first time meeting Allie, and we will get more of her as the film goes on. Do y'all like how these are sprinkled throughout the film, or do you think that splicing them in between moments of, let's say, tension hurt the film?
I like it because I think, like, it doesn't feel jarring to me, and it adds some depth to whatever is going on in Wallace's life, because it's like he's not from this vacuum, and seeing how conscious he was about becoming an asshole and how intentional he was behind it makes it feel that much better to watch him get tortured later.
Right.
But that being said, like, it's not like they could do this, like, chronologically. Like, I wouldn't want to see this stuff before him going elsewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get to that walrus shit sooner.
Yeah.
It is tricky because I think it's important character development, like you said, Dede, but you're right. I mean, I don't want to see 30 minutes of Wallace being a complete asshole so that we can get to the walrus stuff at the 1 hour mark. But I can see people watching this and saying, okay, well, there's dread and there's atmosphere and there's tension in what's happening to him, but then you keep chopping it up to intersperse these more human components. It's kind of interesting because we just saw the same kind of thing in M. Night's new film, Knock at the Cabin, right?
Oh.
So, like, we're interspersing character stuff in there, but I think it's going to work for some people and not so much for others.
Okay.
And you can go listen to our thoughts on Knock at the Cabin on our Patreon feed when it comes out in just about a week or so.
Yeah, absolutely. One final thing that I think is important about this sort of memory flashback, drug-induced haze, he ends it by basically telling Allie that there's nothing soft about him anymore. And part of me is like, oh, that's more foreshadowing.
I'm sorry, but we also do have the whole, like, because the plot point here is that he won't bring her to Canada because it makes Teddy jealous. Teddy gets all weird. He says you're not being authentic, blah, blah, blah. And so, of course, any savvy viewer will automatically realize this is bullshit. But that is the point.
It's like Teddy gets jealous, but Wallace might not realize who of them Teddy is jealous of.
Right.
Yes.
I'll confess that I read into this the way that you're initially supposed to, which is that, like, oh, Teddy just doesn't want him to bring his girlfriend on a trip because Teddy doesn't come, but also because I just anticipated that Wallace was sleeping with women on the trips, which is revealed to be true, but there's also a secondary reason why Teddy doesn't want her to go on the trips.
Exactly.
Okay, so dream over. Wallace returns to the present. He awakens in an old-fashioned wheelchair, and Howard is nearby cleaning a very phallic-looking walrus bone. And this is when he spins... Or is it?
Wet your whistle, my dry little thistle.
The wordplay. So good. So Howard ends up spinning this yarn that Wallace was bitten by a poisonous brown recluse spider, and the result of the venom was enough that a Dr. Mosier had to come in and amputate his left leg just around the knee.
Okay. So here's the thing. Wallace is a despicable character. Justin Long's reaction to seeing his stump is utterly horrifying. It is really, really fucking good. And, like, again, it's a thing where I remember the first time watching this, in my mind, I am like, well, I'm still watching a Kevin Smith movie. I'm still watching a movie that is going to be funny in parts. And it is, I think that's maybe why I find the more disturbing scenes even more disturbing than they actually are. And this is one of them, because him reacting to this stump feels so authentic.
Mm-hmm. And especially since we just saw him talking about how he's like, he's not that guy anymore. Like, he's like this new tough douchebag. And then it's like, no, but you're still going to react like a human if you lose your leg.
Yes.
Mhm.
Like, no, it's just, and he's crying, and for some reason...
Drooling.
He's drooling, and Howard somehow thinks his, like, big gulp is like a safety blanket. Like, it's just like, it's so utterly strange how he handles it. And like, this is, yeah, I love this scene so much, because it is really like, oh, this shit's, I mean, it's not real, but like, oh, this shit is happening to you, and you can't get your leg sewn back on. That's not a thing.
No.
This has changed you forever from this moment on.
Well,
absolutely.
And even when when he wheels away, he's facing the camera but away from Justin Long, and he delivers this, he takes a beat, truly sorry for your loss, and he is laughing.
So unconvincing.
He's laughing.
But Justin Long thinks he's crying.
Oh, yeah. He's not.
No.
Oh,
yeah, and
so
he just
good.
And how he's like, oh no, the doctor's doing rounds. Dr. Mosier is doing rounds. He can't come back. And Justin's like, what fucking rounds? We're in the middle of nowhere. And it's just
and
like,
also, why aren't I at a hospital? Like, why am I still here?
He took away all the phones because he didn't want you to be disturbed.
It's so nonsensical. But problematically, I think Wallace is still a little bit drugged up. So he knows that something is wrong, but he also can't completely verbalize just how wrong things are. So he's kind of like, oh, what? This doesn't make sense. Oh, my leg.
But what makes Howard... Because why does Howard even try to lie? He already has him. There's no way Wallace is getting out of this, so why even spin this yarn about the brown recluse?
It is highly entertaining. Like, I think...
No, I think that's just it. You know, we're going to have a talk about the fetishness of this, the kink of this. And the movie tries to make the argument that Howard isn't deriving any kind of sexual pleasure from this, but the theatricality and the performativity of these kinds of scenes, to me, suggest otherwise. This is role play. He is getting off on watching his really bad performance and how it affects Wallace and getting to see how Wallace reacts, and he is loving it.
Yeah, well, because that's the thing, right? Because it implies that getting sexual pleasure from something ends in orgasm, and maybe we don't see him masturbating, but maybe he doesn't, like whatever. But like, he is getting pleasure of some form from this entire charade.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, there's a power play here, but also like, Wallace never says like, this is fucking ridiculous, and I know you're lying. Like, he just kind of is like, really? Where's the doctor? And it's like, you know there's no doctor, you idiot. Like, so,
it's really weird. He goes along, like, it's almost as though it's an unspoken bit between the two of them, right? Like, it's like he's in the recording studio with Teddy. Just go along with it. Fake laughter, even if it's not that funny.
Yeah, like, he's yes-anding him through his own, like, demise.
Yes.
And...
Okay, so then we move into this dinner sequence, and we start to see the impact of how badly Wallace is fucked up because he can't even eat, even though Howard is like, why aren't you eating? And he's like, I can't move my arms. And then Howard, again, deriving extreme pleasure from this, is like, oh yeah, that's probably the morphine. It's going to affect your mobility. And then when Wallace starts to scream for help, he stands up and slaps him.
Okay.
Yes.
But I'm sorry, but more of this spider charade. Like, he's obsessed with the fact that the spider's called the hobo spider because it gets repeated about 5 times in this movie. But like, when he's like, oh, I just wish I spotted this creature before it so viciously attacked you. It was so tiny. You might even call it itsy bitsy. And then he just bursts into song.
It's creepy and funny. Michael Parks is so fucking good in this movie.
Anytime he sings in this film is like just the greatest thing you're gonna see.
Because when he starts singing, you can hear Wallace just go, "Oh my god!" Because he realizes I am trapped by a fucking psychopath. And then then he just stands up and slaps him.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been screaming this whole time. Like, that to me is actually the most disturbing part of this film, is how once Wallace starts to scream, that's basically all he does for the rest of this movie. It's almost Texas Chainsaw Massacre level of just, oh god, that's all this character can do because their mind is breaking right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think TCM is a little bit more effective at what it's trying to do, but...
But I get where it is the same ballpark, because it's very rare, at least in where we're really watching the psychological effects of a horror premise on a main character. Like, I mean, like, we do see it, but the films, it's never really the film's focus, unless it's something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? And this is definitely a film where, we are watching a man lose his mind gradually throughout the rest of this film.
Yeah, and actually this is kind of bringing around to a point that I wanted to talk about, but assumed that we would get to later and hopefully get back to. Like, one of my favorite things in horror films is the takeaway that survival is not always the best outcome.
Oh.
Interesting.
And TCM is absolutely one of the ones that I cite for that. I'm like, she's never going to be okay.
No.
Like, never. And maybe I'm not as precious about life as other people, but like Wallace, like... I would rather not live through that.
Oh, right. You don't want to end up at this Manitoba Zoo.
Yeah.
Fake Manitoba Zoo.
Oh, it looks like it's a very not fancy zoo.
No, his pool is disgusting.
Yeah, also, you would think Canadians would have seen walruses. Like...
Well, not a man in a walrus suit, maybe.
Yes, true. But yeah, so comparing the two of them, I was like, it's not that Wallace is a finer girl by any stretch of the imagination, but it is that they both do get to the concept of, like, this is so much abject terror. Like, do you want to survive this? Like, what will survive and what will be left of them? Like,
and that's kind of what I think is, the walrus gets revealed. I want to say it's almost an hour into the film, so there's still 40 minutes left. But it's a thing where it's like, I'm surprised it wasn't saved for the final bit, but at the same time, once you're in that suit, no, please mercy kill me. I don't want to be here.
Yeah. Well, why don't we step our way through it, because we're getting there.
Yeah.
So this is the point where we get the reveal. This is what the premise of the film is. Howard has constructed a realistic walrus suit that should fit Wallace perfectly, but in order to be in it, he must behave as a walrus.
Ugh.
So he doesn't just want to put Wallace into this. He wants a actual walrus.
Well, and I actually do think this makes Howard even more fascinating, because his time in, like, at sea has made him a misanthrope. He hates humanity. He's never met a single human being that can live up to this image, this pedestal he has this walrus put on.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, like, you can't do that to people and have them be okay. Like,
well, but
it's
he
very
knows
like
that.
excision.
He's done this multiple times.
Yeah, but it's like very excision ending to me. It's just like, you're not a doctor. Like, you can't.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he kind of does it, but like when you see the suit and there's like a random face on his back, and like, yeah, exactly. And just thinking about, like, did he try to turn those people into walruses too, or is this just? Yeah, but it's like they wouldn't have had the full suit then.
Well, I think what we see is, like, he's had prototypes. Like, when we see him working on Wallace in that sort of surgical room where he's also got the schematics of the insides of walruses, we see various other suits, but then also at the end of the film, right, when he shows up in his own walrus suit, but it's incomplete, and you're just like, oh my god. Like, I know we hear that he has done this to 23 victims at one point, which as a first-time watch, shocking. I thought this was like his first attempt.
Well, you Canadians are too nice. You didn't go after the killer.
I guess so.
He's an old hat at this. Like,
But it's wild to me that, like, I mean, that's where you know the depth of his psychosis, that he has tried this so many times, never succeeded, but he just keeps doing it.
Well,
in the hopes that one day he can recreate Mr. Tusk.
But here's the thing, though. I think he has succeeded. The problem is they always lose the battle with him.
Oh, interesting. My default was that people just psychologically break. Like, he tries to get them to swim and they drown.
And maybe that's true, but based on the climax of the film, I mean, it's maybe like 10 of them, maybe the first 10, like, just broke. But I don't think this is the first time he's made it to the fighting stage.
Oh.
And Wallace just breaks, like, just mentally, though.
Oh, yeah, he's done.
Yeah, but that's what it takes to survive, but, you know, congratulations.
Well, is man indeed a walrus at heart?
No.
What a thing to ask someone.
Like, instantly, it's like, absolutely not. What is wrong? No.
I can unequivocally tell you, most people have never considered whether they are a walrus at heart. It is not a topic of everyday conversation.
Well, and I think that's what because again, so Wallace starts screaming when he asks that question, and then Howard replies by just screaming at him as well. And
yeah, it's like grunts and screams. Grunts and screams.
It's
You're
scary.
just like, What?
Yeah.
What are we doing? I loved it. I loved everything about these scenes.
Yeah, he seems to be enjoying it to a certain extent because this is
Yes!
his experiment coming to... Yeah, of course he is. But like the screaming and everything, even like I wouldn't love it if someone was screaming in my face. But if this was the end point in all of this work that I'd been doing towards that, like, sure, this is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm living my best life. This is what I want. Okay, so we fade to black, and then we get kind of back-to-back scenes that acknowledge that both Allie and Teddy know that Wallace has been cheating on her on these various trips, and also that the two of them would make a better couple. And you're like, okay, yes.
So I love, it's such a weird cut to have just, it's Genesis Rodriguez facing the camera, delivering this honestly kind of heartbreaking monologue. I will say, Dede, like you, I don't think this is a perfect film. And where the film falls for me is Allie's relationship with Wallace, because we get this monologue from her in which you're like, well, fuck yeah, like cheat on his ass, kill him, whatever. But then by the end of the film, you're like, why the fuck do you care about this asshole?
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's just she cares about who he was. Like, and he likes that she's hot, I'm assuming.
But it's when she's like, I'm glad my dad isn't alive to see this. It's like,
yeah.
Like, she knows that there is a problem. There is an inherent flaw in her relationship if she can acknowledge that. But then, like, she's acknowledging it to the person that will eventually be revealed to be the guy that she's cheating with.
But again, that dread you're talking about, the score in this scene is so ominous. Like, it's like you're listening to this heartbreaking story, but you're also like, where the fuck is this going?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. This to me was one of the biggest tonal shifts in the film, because I really did not know what to make of it, because I was not prepared.
So I will say on the Blu-ray, Kevin Smith says that his model for tonal shifts was Pulp Fiction.
Right.
I can see that.
He got to see Pulp Fiction before it premiered at Cannes. It was like a Harvey Weinstein course they had it, and so they're like, hey, we just got Clerks. You want to come see Pulp Fiction, the new Tarantino film? He's like, yeah, sure. And he was in awe at the tonal shifts in that movie. He can go from laughing to gasping to laughing again. And so, while he never says he's like, he thinks Tusk matches that is absolutely what he was going for. But with Tusk, a more experimental tonal shift. And I think the experimental part to me is more like, oh, you're just trial and error. And sometimes it is an error in this film. But I appreciate the effort.
It's audacious, if nothing else. I agree that it doesn't entirely work. I think some people could quibble and say, well, did you even need to? Is this more of you doing something as a filmmaker as opposed to something that benefits the final product of the art? I, for one, kind of liked it. It was unexpected. Because
it's never boring, right? Like, again, it may not always work, but you're always like, well, this is... What is happening here?
This is new. Okay.
Yeah, and I take his like use of experimental there to be more like tinkering and seeing how it goes, rather than like this is experimental cinema, like with the capital E.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, absolutely.
There's a narrative here.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think it is interesting, and compared to his other films, like there is in my short memory not anything else along these lines that he's done before.
You're correct. I mean, Red State is close, but again, that's the other genre film he's done.
Yeah, and I think he said that's where he started to try to do it, and he feels like he did it better here.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, I mean, Red State has a bit of comedy in it, but that film is much more like a straightforward horror film. I would call Tusk a horror comedy. I would not call Red State a horror comedy.
I would say that it's a horror film that transitions into an action film.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate, yeah.
Or like a war film, maybe.
Yeah, and also Red State, I don't think it would be as successful as if it tried to make light of it. Like, we can joke about people turning people into walruses because it's not a real thing, but Red State, the horror in is very much based in reality.
Right.
That is
100%.
True. Yeah. All right, so Wallace is woken by his phone, which I'm just like, Howard, what are you doing? This is not your first rodeo. Why are you leaving phones lying around?
I think he did it on purpose.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. But the shot, again, I know I commented on how I didn't like Kevin Smith's framing in a lot of this. I do love the shot of Wallace on the phone, as you can see Howard in the background.
Creeping up on him. Yep. Yeah, so Wallace ends up missing a phone call from Allie, who has called him because it's the next day and she hasn't heard from him. But he does have enough time to leave a voicemail for her as well as partially to Teddy. He doesn't ever reveal that he has traveled to Bifrost. Like, he literally asked for instructions on how to get there, but he just says, like 2 hours north or something in these voicemails. And I was like, Wallace,
Yeah.
maybe you're still drugged, but dude, you're making it really hard to find you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you know what? They fucking
They
find
do.
him.
They managed to find it, yeah.
I know. If it weren't for the Big Lebowski.
So dumb. But in the course of seeing both Allie and Teddy checking these messages, we learn that they are a couple because Teddy has stayed over at Allie's place. And then, yes, Wallace is knocked out mid-message.
By the walrus cock.
Right. And this is when we get to the sewing sequence. So this is our Dr. Frankenstein kind of laboratory sequence. But as Howard is sewing, we're hearing him relate his basic origin story. So he is what is called a Duplessis orphan. So he has a Batman origin story where his parents died in the big bad city of Montreal. And then he was sent to an insane asylum under the Premier's cost-cutting schemes.
So he was sent to an orphanage, but then the government made a deal where it was, we can cut funds by declaring orphanages mental health facilities. And then they closed the orphanage and then sent him to a mental institution where he and all the other boys were repeatedly beaten and raped. But not by the staff, but by politicians and priests who would regularly visit the institution to rape them.
Mm-hmm. And this is a real phenomenon. By the way.
Yeah.
So this is actually part of Canadian history?
It is, yeah, in Quebec.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Canada jokes aside. Holy shit! What?
Yeah, because, I mean, here's the thing. We can make light of some of the dumb shit that Kevin Smith wrote into this movie, but, like, all of the historical stuff, all of the names and dates and stuff, those are all real.
You know, if y'all led with that, you might get more attention to your history.
I mean, not exactly things we're proud of, Trey. This also isn't actually popular knowledge. Like, Quebec, to those who don't know, is very much its own kind of place. Like, Canada technically has 2 official languages, but really it's like one official language of English, and then we've got 2 in Quebec where you have to do everything in both. Like, it's got its own star system, they've got their own studios for making films and television. Like, everything is just different in Quebec, which is not to say that this kind of shit doesn't happen in other places,
right.
But not a lot of Canadians would even know this history.
I will say, I don't know, do you consider this, like, in poor taste to include this bit of Canadian history, like, in a film like this? Like, do you think it's weird to exploit this history?
I mean, no, because Kevin Smith very deliberately set this film in Canada, and then he's referencing a Canadian piece. It's like, it's not... Well, I mean, it is taboo, but it doesn't mean that it's untouchable.
Right.
If nothing else, I'm always just perplexed by Kevin Smith's love of Canada. I'm like,
well,
dude, what are we to you that you love us so much?
I get it. I love you guys.
Aw, thanks, Dede.
I think at the very least, and maybe this sounds weird to say, but I think that this bit of information shows that he's not just like he hasn't just watched Degrassi a bunch of times and been like, oh my god, Canada, eh? Like, he does know Canada.
Yes. Yeah.
And I will say that I do think that some of his monologuing for that he writes for Parks is poetic. Like, even as gross as it is, when Parks is like, oh yeah, they use this to satisfy their desires through the rectum and lips of a child. These devils ran amok with my innocence. I think that's, like, in a gross way, very beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. He does have a very good way with words.
And when you got someone like Michael Parks, you can trust that it's going to be relayed. Like, this feels near Shakespearean kind of levels. Like, this is a very extreme monologue about a very disturbing topic. I think the other interesting thing, Trace, is that it's not a queer villain, but there's very clear connotations that a queer sexual assault is what turned this man into the deviant he is today.
Yes, 100% yes. And now he wants to fuck a walrus.
Yeah.
Right.
I also feel a little weird about saying that, like, this is all made up, unlike Red State. But to my knowledge, turning people into walruses is not real.
I will say that I looked up walrus fetishes and absolutely torpedoed my search history.
No.
But I've got a game at the end of the show that I'm going to play with the two of you.
Oh my god. Dede.
Sounds like we're all going to win.
There you go. It's
we all watched
walrus,
Tusk.
yes.
We've already won. We watched
Exactly.
Tusk.
Okay, so this is all delivered in a very restrictive framing. So we're really focusing on Michael Park's face, and then we pull back and get to see more of what he's working on. And we see that Wallace has lost his other leg and that his arms have been partially sewn to his side.
This was a press image that was released in...
Oh, no.
Well, it's just him overlooking Justin Long, with his arm tied to his side. Like a crucified T-Rex. When I tell y'all that is the line that get the biggest laugh in my theater, which is probably why I gravitate towards it so much. I'm not even kidding. People died at the crucified T-Rex line.
I mean, it's a funny line. I don't like anything about Johnny Depp's performance.
It is one fuck of a bummer to look at, I'll tell you that.
I was going to put that in my opening line, actually.
It's okay, y'all are wrong. Johnny Depp is fun in this movie. We all get it.
Boy. Double bill this and Mordecai. You've got yourself a good night.
Honestly, at this point, I want to watch Mordecai just to have an opinion on it. But we haven't even gotten to Johnny Depp in this movie yet.
No, that's a really strong mustache action in both of them.
Yes, it's true. Okay, so Allie and Teddy arrive in Canada, but because of the name of the podcast, when Allie tries to make a phone call to the police, she gets hung up on.
Oh, that's a
I
good
love
joke,
that.
though.
I love that.
It's a Nazi party.
I love how it's just like, oh, lo and behold,
Comes back to bite him.
yeah, what, your actions are going to have repercussions, you dingbat.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe Nazis aren't funny. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Where was this movie a couple of years ago during the pandemic when everybody decided that Nazis were okay and we shouldn't be punching them in the face anymore?
I mean, they should just watch it every other month like I do.
Dede, this is a fascinating bit of character trivia about you. I'm not going to lie.
Okay, this is a total aside. Why does it surprise you how much I like this?
Right? I'm like, everything I know about Dede is that, this tracks.
It's not... it has nothing to do with you. I think it's more to do with the movie itself. Like, I don't think I guess I've never met someone who, A, genuinely likes Tusk, and B, much less watches it 3 times a month.
Yeah, just when I need it. Like,
yeah.
Just when I need a pick-me-up, I throw on Tusk.
It's mental health.
Yeah, you know what? You do you. Whatever gets you through the fucking day.
I'm trying, yeah.
Also, you could do far worse than this. Like, when
Right?
people say, oh, I'm just, mainlining Hereditary, like when Jen said that last week, I was just like, Jen, what are we doing here?
Well, my hope is this. My hope is that after all 3 of us are singing Tusk's praises, that any listeners who are listening right now who have not seen this movie will go see
what are you
this
doing
movie
with
out.
your life?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so less fun is when we get this quaint music and we just see Wallace screaming and crying, and then we pull out to see what his body now looks like, and also this absolutely what the fuck of an aquarium setup that Howard somehow has in his house.
It reminds me of the penguin from Batman Returns.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, like the concrete layer.
Yes, and both the way the walrus looks, too.
And there's like the screen where he's like projecting the sea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like a museum exhibition kind of thing, right? Where like, here's the walrus in its natural habitat, and then also a man in a walrus suit. It's so disturbing, but also kind of cute. I thought the most fascinating detail was that you can so clearly see Justin Long's eyes.
Yes.
In this suit. Like, you can tell it's him.
Yes.
Unequivocally throughout the rest of the film.
Yes.
And here's the thing, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there is a music stinger or a cue whenever we do the zoom out. It is just we get the close up shot of his face, and we're like, oh shit, and then we get this rapid zoom out, but there's no like ba-dum-bum.
No.
And that's what I think is so funny. Again, this is horror and comedy merging perfectly in this reveal for me, because I do think it's horrifying, but the zoom out is just so funny.
Because the setting is dumb. It doesn't make any sense. And you're just like, wait, what?
No, it's just so absurd. You're like, what the hell? Like, but also then you, like, if anyone with a modicum of empathy is like, I don't want to be put in that suit and be totally aware of my, like, surroundings. Also, I love the idea of, like, Howard setting up his entire, like, concrete layer and, like, taking a step back and being like, it's missing something. And, like, him trying to think of a way to make it feel more homey for his walruses.
And not to, like, we haven't really, I mean, I know, Dede, you mentioned, like, oh, there's a face on his back, but, like, the design of this suit, it is gross, but to me, the big thing is the toes that you can still see on the tail of the walrus.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. Like, when people describe this movie to me, they always say, oh, it's Justin Long gets transformed into a walrus like a suit. And I just thought that it was something he gets zipped into. I didn't realize that it was body horror mutilation, but also still kind of a suit that has been sewn together. Like, I honestly got Buffalo Bill vibes from this, which to me was the other kind of weird queer component. It's like, this is a suit made of human beings in the shape of a walrus for the purposes of transforming a human being.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's, like, the lack of consent and assumption of someone else's skin, like, literally. Like,
Well, yeah, it's just, he's been taking people's skins that don't work for him.
Right, he leaves the body parts that don't fit the suit to be discovered by the police.
Yeah.
Or just under the water, as we'll discover later.
Well, yeah, because then he drags him into the water with a fucking chain.
Yeah.
So good. He's got to fight his way out. It's worked so well before.
A walrus must learn to swim.
I mean, yes, but...
I mean, maybe baby steps. Don't drag the person all the way into the water. So we're now sort of doing back and forth. So we'll do a scene with Wallace and Howard, and then we'll go to Allie and Teddy. So for Allie and Teddy, they end up starting to track down his whereabouts in Winnipeg. They go to the police station, and they fill in Detective Frank Garman, who is played by Ralph Garman, and he ends up suggesting that they make contact with a Quebecois police detective who is in the region hunting a serial killer.
Enter Guy Lapointe.
Except he doesn't even pronounce it that way. He pronounces it Guy Lapointe. And you're just like, if he was French-Canadian, it would be Guy Lapointe.
But wait, who says Guy Lapointe then? Someone calls him Guy Lapointe. Nevertheless, we get, again, another camera-facing monologue from Johnny Depp, who is never credited. He is credited as Guy Lapointe in the credits of this movie.
Yep.
But here's the thing. So, well, I do find a lot of his lines funny. I love the T-Rex. I have the, when you called me, I slept like a breastfed baby. But at the same time, when he is talking about the killings themselves and like the pathology of Howard, I actually do find this pretty disturbing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We learned that he removes the victims' tongues, which is why we will never hear Justin Long say another line of dialogue in the movie. He keeps them alive for 30 days, and that purportedly he doesn't fuck them. And there have been 23 victims.
Yeah, and he talks about finding the femur in the mouth.
And that is one fuck of a bummer to look at, I can tell you that.
Yeah. I mean, okay, here's my beef with this, other than the fact that I don't like it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it's getting so exciting with everything else that's happening in the film. And this just, like, hits the brakes on all that good stuff. And it keeps going on. And, like, I think I get the point of the character, and I'm not saying to do away with him entirely, not that anyone asked me, but, like, it just, it doesn't sit right in this exact point in the film.
Okay. So this is a pacing issue for you.
I mean, yeah, if you ask me tomorrow, I'm going to say something different. But for right now, like, I just don't like how it, like, because I'm like, oh, I even want to right now get back to talking about, like, the underwater wrestling and everything like that. And, you know, what this actually means and fetishizes and everything. And it's just, this is just kind of like, he's giving the fact that there's a history, he's giving some background, but I think we could have either gotten there quicker or more interestingly, or possibly at a different time.
So, question. Do you think it maybe would have been better if we kind of condensed all these Guy Lapointe scenes into a segment instead of doing all the because I do think that's my thing. I think the cross-cutting hurts this film in the long run. I wonder if we had gotten all this shit out of the way in one scene, if it would maybe feel less egregious.
It's interesting, right? Because we didn't have as much of an issue when we were doing the Ali Teddy stuff.
Right.
And I think partially it's because even though we know who Wallace is as a character, this is still relevant, germane stuff that's going to advance the plot. Whereas I think a lot of the Guy Lapointe stuff, it is offering us to a certain extent some background on Howard, but we already got the more relevant stuff for Howard. And I would actually argue you could cut Guy Lapointe out of this film and you could just fill in a couple of details. Like you could even have this police officer that they talk to, Garmin. Oh yeah, we've been tracking this guy. We found 23 bodies scattered across the various provinces. So move on. Here's
the thing. I don't even disagree with either one of you. I think you could cut him out of this movie and it would make it a more effective horror film. And I do think that Guy Lapointe as a character is feeding Kevin Smith's probably worst impulses when it comes to filmmaking and comedy. I'm not even denying that. I still find all of this very funny.
Right. And I think that's kind of the litmus test, right? You know, Dede and I don't find this funny.
No one does.
Drawn out. And then there's you, Trace, who's like, well, I'm a sick son of a bitch. I've got a weird sense of humor and this works for me and therefore not bothered by it.
But again, do I think it would make it a more effective horror film to remove him? Yes. But I don't care.
I mean, this is the tonal shift, right? Like, we talked about it a little bit when we get Ali's direct address thing, but this is where it's, okay, no, we're back to comedy. Like, this is full comedy with disturbing horror details, but everything, like, down to the fact that he's dressed in a fucking beret. Like, it's the most ridiculously stupid caricature of a character. Ha, 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 ha. Like, this is the tonal shift.
He is telling us all these details about like the actual physical transformation, but we just saw it. Like it's kind of like it's gross to hear that he's done it to 23 people, but like we know he has a femur in his mouth.
Oh, see if we had gotten that before, and then that leads into the walrus reveal, but then you're inserting the outright comedy before that reveal, so it's like, oh, tonally, what does that? So again, like that's where we're going back to Kevin Smith being like, I'm being experimental with my tonal shifts. You're playing with it. I would
which one works better? Like, can we see them directly compared?
Like, there's probably a fan edit out there somewhere. Because this, if you're a fan editor, this would be a fucking minefield of a movie.
Oh,
like, let me see what I can do with this thing.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you said earlier, Trace, that there's like an 88-minute cut of this that probably works really well. I do wonder what this movie is like if you know, you could even dial back some of the Ali and Teddy stuff even and just have it be like a 60-minute walrus cut.
I am actually not authorized to discharge a weapon at a bug. I would also assume that there is no poutine weenie.
Jesus fuck. Yeah, so we do get this. So we do get this flashback to 2 years before in La Chute, Quebec, where Lapointe ended up stumbling onto Howard. He was going under a different name, Bartholomew Moussier. Fucking hell. I will say, I don't love jokes about Canadians and hockey because it's very tired as a Canadian. But I did love the idea that Lapointe was investigating the disappearance of a new Nordique hockey player named Gregory Gumtree. And I'm just like, this is stupid. Like, this I was actually laughing at because I'm just like, this is so dumb. But I have to laugh.
But I will say this, though. During this entire... This scene is ridiculous. I mean, you have Michael Parks putting on this mentally disabled...
It's the local yokel accent.
Nevertheless, the idea... Because watching this, well, he has that guy in that cabin. While this is a very funny scene, there's still that creeping thing in your brain that's like, well... But he's also a serial killer that does have this guy in his basement. So again, we're in a total mishmash that for some reason I find this scene hilarious, but I do also find this scene disturbing still, especially watching Michael Parks do whatever the fuck he's doing.
Yeah, I think I would have liked it a little bit better if it had have ended with a more ominous kind of sting. Like we see him go around back and there's like a foot or something sticking out or something, just to say, oh, LaPointe is such a dumbass that he was right there. He could have saved this person.
So Joe, out of curiosity, have you seen Yoga Hosers?
I have not. I've just heard nothing.
Don't
but
watch
bad
it.
Stuff.
But just a heads up. So not only are the daughters like the main characters of the movie, Guy Lapointe is in the movie as a main character.
Oh God. Okay. Well, now I understand why you both said it's unwatchable.
as someone who likes Guy Lapointe in Tusk, I did not enjoy anything that they were doing in Yoga Hosers.
Well, yeah, because even this is a taste, and it's already too much for some people. I can't imagine him as a main character in a film. Absolutely not.
That he is.
And I know we're going to get there, but also the fact that he's like part of the rescue team and everything, like just.
But is he?
I know. It's just kind of like.
He's ineffectual.
He is, but I'm also just like, why is he here? He's not on this journey with us.
Exactly. It's the weirdest thing, right? Like, I do find that I'm resistant to films that introduce characters very late in the game and then wants to make them an important part of the resolution. Like, I'm naturally predisposed against it. And then you got this grating character on top of that. So yeah, like at the end of the film, when he shows up with that rifle, I just thought, get him out of here.
Unfortunately, it does reek of, hey, my daughter and his daughter are really good friends. Let me give him a part in my movie so we can film for 2 days. That is 100%. I'm not even going to fight that.
Yeah. We had Johnny Depp. We put him in the film. We used him.
Yeah. This reeks of someone or a director who's editing his own film and is just so in love with certain scenes, won't consider the notion of cutting them even if they don't work. Like, you know how sometimes you're watching a film and you're like, I don't need this entire thing in there. I don't even need this character. And it's just like, oh, the director is really in love with this shot or whatever. And you just kind of crawl in their brain and make assumptions. But that's, that's how I feel with this. It's just like, he thought this was fucking hilarious. And he's only making the film for himself, which usually or can work out quite well. And certainly does for other parts of it. But just for me, it never adds anything to it.
But it doesn't kill. You still love this movie, Dede, despite this character's very prominent role in the back half of the film.
Just like people, I accept films with all their flaws. That's not true.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah, now that we're talking about it, like I'm like, I never even fast forward through this on all of my rewatches.
Oh, wow.
I just am kind of like, there it is. I do kind of like watching Teddy and
just
Allie together.
Right.
Like, I like seeing them kind of bond and be really concerned because it makes me want them to find Wallace. So I guess that at least satisfies some sort of like inertia in the plot for me.
Right.
But yeah. No, I'm like, I was watching and it's like, even when I talk to people about this film, I'm like, oh, I love this movie. And they're like, oh, but this part sucks. I'm like, I didn't say it didn't. Like,
I'm not challenging that.
Yeah. It's just like my least favorite part of one of the more whimsical films that I like.
Yeah.
Well, should we just talk about the convenience scene since it's kind of the last prominent Lapointe scene, or do we want to continue going chronologically?
I mean, we can't. There's not much to talk about here. I mean, it's just, you're right. As you said earlier, Joe, it's a redux of the exact. We see the exact same fucking thing, except with a few additional bits of dialogue.
Mm-hmm. I will say, though, I actually found this to be the most successful scene. And maybe it's just because there was more for everyone to kind of do. Like, Lapointe gets to show off his kind of deductive reasoning, and he's got the Big Lebowski joke. But we also get the return of the Yoga Hoser girls, and they... I don't know, like, there's something sort of charming about the way these characters all get a little moment to shine, and then the scene is over, and we've got the information that we need so that the characters can move forward.
Yeah, I'll give you that. The one thing that, like, I want to say confused me on the first watch, and I always kind of reflect back on it, is when they're like, oh, it's Mr. Mustache. And, like, I assumed that was, like, a nickname they gave him after he left and kind of made fun of him behind his back. But then to see that there was this extra interaction, and I'm like, well, why didn't we see this the first time?
Yeah, it feels like there's new details that we didn't see, and you're like, wait, are we misremembering?
No, there's a movie I've seen recently that does that, where it's like, we flash back. Oh, I think it's Glass Onion.
I was like, is it all of After Sun?
Well, it's like we flash back and we see the same scene as before, but with extra bits of dialogue that were cut out from the first time we saw it.
True. Okay, I'll give you that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a weird continuity thing where people just don't always line it up, but I'll confess I almost always notice as a viewer. I'm just like, oh, there's extra stuff in here that wasn't there before, and now I'm paying attention to it.
But
Why?
that's intentional. I mean, in Glass Onion, it's the scene where like Catherine Hahn runs after Janelle Monáe, and we see the before and after, but then there's a bit of things between that where she talks to the other guy, whatever. So to me, I don't think it's the filmmakers trying to pull one over on us. I think they know. They're like, no, I'm just not showing you the whole scene the first time, and I'm going to show you the whole scene the second time.
Yeah, and both times in the first time, they try and give us the like safe feeling that we've seen the whole thing, so we're not just like, wait a second, we're missing something.
Exactly.
Right.
And you could view that as a cheat. I totally get someone being like, well, that's fucking cheating. It doesn't really bother me in either one of these scenarios.
Yeah. I think I'm more expecting them in like a whodunit, like Knives Out.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, like it makes sense when you're deliberately trying to deflect or shine a light on something because there's mysteries to be solved. I'm talking about like I've seen shows where we see like a phone conversation and you're just meant to be like, oh, remember this phone conversation, but there's a different line of dialogue or an extra word or something. You're like, did they refilm that and then fuck it up? Like, what are we doing?
Probably.
It is neither here nor there. They get the information they need. Big Lebowski, everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Okay, so meanwhile, back at the house, we have had a scene where Howard has leaned against and sung to Wallace in the suit.
I have seen this movie several times.
Yes.
In all caps. Then he leans on him. Yep. Then he starts singing. Then he gives him a raw back roll.
Fish. Yeah. And he tells him, it's not like, here, eat this, like, I know you're going to be hungry. Feed on this.
It's just so good. It's just so good.
It's so good.
I do think part of the problem with the Le Point stuff, not to, like, hammer it home, is just this stuff with Wallace and Howard is so fucking good. I just can't believe that we keep cutting away from it because all of these scenes are fascinating, grotesque, absurd. They're hitting all the right beats, and I just want to spend more time with these characters.
Yeah.
I don't even. Here, it's the thing is, I like, again, as someone who likes the Guy Laplante, the Alley, the Teddy stuff, it's the thing where, but yeah, I can absolutely see and sometimes feel where, like, constantly cutting back to them is doing a disservice to the film as a whole.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so after we get the Big Lebowski stuff, we cut back to the house, and this is where we learn the truth about why Howard is, in part, so obsessed with Mr. Tusk. And it's revealed that when he was stuck with him for the 60 days, he ended up eventually killing him so that he could survive before he was rescued. So that is in part why he's been trying to replicate this best companion, best friend. It's because he feels guilty that he ended up having to kill him in order to survive.
Yes, it's not a huge surprise, but God, don't I feel bad for Mr. Howard Howe in this scene?
Right? I think when people say, oh, there's nothing grotesque about what he's doing with these men when he puts them into the suit, it's really more about the friendship that he's lost. I could definitely accept that.
Yeah.
I personally don't. I think that there's something weird and kinky and, like, fetishy going on about this.
Oh, he fucked that walrus before he ate it, 100%.
Oh, yeah. He has a walrus penis over his mantle. Like,
gay!
Yeah, like the very first introduction that we get to Walrus in this movie is Dick.
Yeah, and he likes Dick just as much as Wallace does. Or at least talking about them. Or maybe even more, I don't know.
They're flirting the entire movie.
Really disturbing flirting, yeah.
Mr. Tusk.
Yeah, and just like the way that Howard describes Mr. Tusk and describes, the guilt he has,
it's like
in
a
the
lover.
friendship. It is like a lover. Like, I would,
Yes.
I like you guys, but I'm not going to talk about you like that. Like, it's just like such a very specific, like, longing and certain words that he's choosing. Like, yes, he's quite poetic. However, it takes it to a new level.
I was on this podcast with Dede, and she had this smooth, velvety voice that seemed to invite me into her warm flesh.
Okay, stop. I mean, I think the other piece, like we mentioned about how Howard just doesn't like humanity, right? Like he has never found a human connection in the same vein that he found with this animal. And I think that's also where we get that kind of like loverly connection. He's basically removed himself from society so that he can try to replicate the lover that he lost.
Yeah, well, anytime we have seen him interact with a human, it's not him, it's a version of him. Like, so there, I mean, granted, one is like a police officer he's trying to evade, and the other one is someone he's going to turn into a walrus. But that being said, like, he does not know how to interact with humanity. He is always taking on like an assumption of a version of a human.
Yeah, he's playing roles of what he thinks regular humans are, and not very successfully.
No, so off the mark.
Okay, so as LaPointe distributes guns to both Allie and Teddy, Trace, I thought it was a little bit ironic that only 2 weeks after we had our discussion about Americans and guns, we do get a reference here.
Dede, to fill you in, Joe apparently grew up thinking all Americans had guns because that's how Canadians, they watch American movies and like, oh, Americans have guns. And this whole scene, what kind of American are you? I don't know what accent I'm doing. I'm as bad as
starting a little German.
I'm as bad as Johnny Depp at this point. But yeah, I thought of you also during
there we go.
I mean, fair point. I mean, like my summer camp had riflery, so.
Ooh.
We had archery. Thank you very much, Dede. Oh. What the fuck?
We had archery, and then when you turned 10, you got handed a gun.
10!
Oh.
Yeah, and for the record, I was a very good mark, but I do not nor will I ever own a gun.
I never either, but honestly, I really want to go to a shooting range because I would love to, like, you know, they have the axe throwing things.
Yes,
I would love to go to a shooting range and just shoot something to get my anger out. I feel like that would help.
Right. Okay, well, tell you what, Trace. When I come to Denver, we will go to a gun range and we will shoot a gun.
There you go.
I don't even know if I'm sure there has to. In Texas, it was probably easier to find a gun range. I don't know about
this.
Denver,
is true. Okay, when we go to Fantastic Fest, we'll go shoot a gun.
You guys are in cowboy land too. They're just like actual like Wranglers.
Yeah, actually, yes, absolutely. But no, I'm sure there's a gun range around here somewhere. I mean, Denver is interesting. Colorado's a more liberal state, but it is like 50-50, where it's like, oh, you could be in a very liberal area or you could be in a very conservative area.
And then you could be in a walrus area.
I was like, this is when Joe's going to be like Guy and be like, all the Americans and their guns. Like, this is just enforcing that negative stereotype.
So speaking of battling and doing carnage, this is where Howard basically tells Wallace that the final test is that he needs to bring the walrus out. So in order to do that, they must fight a walrus battle to the death. So Howard comes out in his own makeshift suit and they go at it. And Wallace ultimately ends up stabbing/penetrating Howard to death.
So I feel like we have to mention the fact, though, that the Fleetwood Mac song Tusk is used during this scene. And, y'all, the horrible music person that I am, I had seen The Americans before this. And I know that Tusk plays a very prominent part in the pilot of The Americans. I didn't connect it. So, and I didn't know what the song was. And then I saw this movie and I heard this song. I have no fucking idea what it was. Nothing connected with me. So literally the whole idea of like, oh, we're having a movie about a walrus called Tusk and we're going to use, apparently also most of the budget for this movie went to getting the rights to Tusk. Because
oh my God.
I think Fleetwood Mac is Fleetwood Mac is notorious for not wanting to give away the rights to their songs.
Well, because look
Can you
what
imagine
happens.
them being like, and you want to use it in this movie? $2 million.
Tusk isn't even a song. It's literally an orchestral piece of music where people occasionally talk about whatever. I love this song so much.
It's a good song.
This was the first time of me watching Tusk, like fully knowing the song Tusk, and it was a blast to listen to.
I'm like, full disclosure, it is not unusual that if I'm like walking home a little tipsy from a bar, I will put this song on because it makes me feel powerful.
The drums are really like, you get into it, right?
Yeah. Keeps up a good pace. I'm into it.
But nevertheless, there was something hilarious about watching these two walruses. Apparently, also, He modeled this after Iron Man, because in Iron Man, Jeff Bridges like gets in a bigger iron suit than Iron Man, and that is the whole concept behind Howard's walrus suit for this. It's like, oh, you're getting in the same suit but bigger, but then you lose.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
The connections are obvious. How did we not all see it?
Literally, that's the one piece of that interview with Kevin Smith where I'm like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have heard that.
Really?
I don't know that I want to make this comparison.
I mean, it's like Pacific Rim, where it's like you put on a big like robot suit and you fight the kaiju. Is that what's happening?
Basically.
Oh my god.
But nevertheless, though, watching him break out of the skin suit is also very gross.
Yeah, it's nasty.
Because he's like wearing the face, like, yeah.
Well, there's something, but again, just watching them like fucking flop around.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine how bad those things smell too?
Ugh.
Yes, I can imagine that. No, I think like the fact that I am so disgusted shows how effective it is.
Right.
Like, I mean, we're all like, oh, this is gross. Oh, good stuff.
Well done, you movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's just, and this is when Wallace is maybe the third iteration of Wallace. Like, he's not old Wallace, he's next Wallace, because he is no longer himself.
Well, he's gone full walrus, as the podcast episode will narrate to us during the closing credits.
Right.
Wallace full walrus?
Yeah. What?
How did I not say that before? My goodness.
Wallace full walrus.
Oh my god, that is a tongue twister. I cannot do this 2 hours into a podcast.
But nevertheless, so he kills him. Teddy
kills
and
him.
Allie bust in, and then Guy Lapointe shoots a gun.
Fucking fake out. Give me a break. Yeah, we jump ahead 1 year after fading to black, and this is where we see Wallace is now living in what Kevin Smith describes as a better walrus enclave.
Is it?
Is it?
I
It's
mean,
pretty fucking sad looking.
I guess, I mean, like, I worry about sun protection as a very pale person, and I'm like, oh no, he's outside. But he's wearing someone else's skin, so that's probably not a concern of his,
This is true. You're not going to get cancer because...
Okay, so this is practical.
But how is
Sorry.
I mean, look, practicality aside, like, this skin should be rotting on him.
Right?
Yes. A year later?
Yeah.
Unless it's been, like, tanned or something. Like, if it had been treated, I could imagine it, but
Like, how much vascular connection did... That's like
those
a band,
toes
a band
in
name,
the tail
but yeah.
alone, like, I don't...
What if the toes could move? Like
Right.
you could pick up a pen with them.
I mean, honestly, if we ever get the sequel Tusks with a $sign for the S, maybe we'll see it.
Maybe.
God, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by the concept of the sequel and what it could entail. But well, let's finish off this first film. So Allie and Teddy come to visit, and we get this one final flashback when Justin Long was still Justin Long, and basically Allie is trying to convince Wallace that it's okay to cry. It's what separates us from the animals. And then we cut back to the present, and we see that both of them are crying.
So,
but also, she should not say that she still loves him because...
Yeah.
In front of Teddy? Like...
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I love you, Teddy, but I still love my newly transformed Walrus X more.
Cheating, asshole, misogynist boyfriend Walrus X.
Yeah.
She needs to go into some therapy because her priorities are fucked.
But that's what I'm saying. Is like that's the one piece of this film that really doesn't lock in for me. Is like we get this amazing monologue from her earlier in the film, but then he became a walrus, so all of a sudden she's like, "All's good."
Yeah. Do you think it's just to confirm that things would have gone differently if he had stayed a human being? Maybe they would have broken up. She would have discovered him cheating or some shit like that. But because of this circumstance, she can't help but stay trapped in how she felt about him before because she feels so bad about it.
Yeah.
Maybe, but also like she's stuck with Wallace through various versions of Wallace that suck.
Right, that is true.
This is the one that sucks the least, I guess.
Maybe.
Because he can't talk.
Yeah. I kind of took it as like, I mean, I think she feels terrible. I also think that there is a very well-established pattern in film and in real life of women undervaluing themselves and dating really shitty guys, and that's just, it continues to this day, sometimes in my own life.
Right.
So it's just like one of those things where it's like, it's not that out of the realm of having empathy for her for feeling like she can't leave him in this moment. Like,
Right.
even though she totally could.
So, Dede, what I'm hearing is you need to seek out a walrus because it might be better than your current dating options.
Oh, no. Like, no. Also, I'm not I'm a vegetarian. I don't want to deal with raw fish.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Yeah, so that alone is just like gonna make it so that we don't get matched on Tinder or whatever.
If a walrus could swipe.
I mean, I don't want to think of it with his nose, maybe. Anyway. Or with his toes. With the toes that can move. Yeah.
So yeah, we end the movie with this sad song playing over this disgusting pool, which looks like it needs to be cleaned, and then we get the audio from the podcast, and then there is a post-credit sequence where Guy Lapointe laments not having a second slider. It's still not funny, but the movie's over. So before we talk about our final thoughts, would you like to play the game?
Yes.
All right. So as I mentioned, I looked up sexual walrus fetishes,
Oh my God.
and I found only a single entry that came close. It was in a entry on Urban Dictionary called The Whistling Walrus, and I would love for each of you to tell me what you think is involved.
This is a sexual act or sexual position? Or it's just a fetish?
This is a act.
An act called the Whistling Walrus.
Okay, wait a second. Did you have to put in both sexual and fetish?
It is a sexual fetish act.
Okay. The Whistling Walrus?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to say this is when you are a third person in a threesome and you put two rock hard cocks on either side of your mouth.
Like Tusk.
Yeah, and put the heads in your mouth and blow. Like literally blow. And the space between the cock heads will therefore induce a whistle.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
You're up, Dede.
Dede, what say you to follow that?
I mean, of course I was thinking along the lines of penis, but like I was thinking more like orchestral, because there's already a trombone around.
Oh,
like,
yes. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if this would be like a piccolo version of that. Sorry. I'm trying to think of this. No, you just kind of took my breath away just now, Trace, though. Like,
All right, shall I read it to you?
oh God, please end this.
Okay, so you're going to be disappointed and also horrified and hopefully also laugh. So this was written by Davey. There's 3 E's in that. So we can all credit him for this. The Whistling Walrus, a sexual fetish act in which the male takes a fatty turd into the woman's mouth and proceeds to fuck the mouth orifice. This is misspelled as O-U-R-F-U-S.
Unless it's not office.
It's the European spelling.
Right. All of those things. Yeah, so a fatty turd into the woman's mouth proceeds to fuck the mouth orifice, pushing the poo down the woman's esophagus. He will then shove his dick into her anus and pee while squeezing her tits very, very hard. He will then come in her eye and slap her titties and shit on them. It's cool.
Wait.
Thank you so much, Davey, for your contributions to this world.
It's cool. I thought you were going to end that sentence about 5 times.
I know. It just keeps going and has no bearing to a walrus whatsoever.
No, there's also a lot more movement implied in that than you might think.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this is totally the kind of clip that would be on the Nazi Party, by the way. So,
Right?
I'm sorry. It's cool.
It killed me.
It's
That's
cool.
why I had to include it.
because it's totally not written by a 13-year-old.
Absolutely not.
Okay, that is Tusk, everybody. Dede, as the guest of honor, what are your final thoughts on this masterpiece of Canadian American cinema?
Thank you.
Canadian American. I would say this is a super fun movie, and I feel like it is well aware of how stupid it is
Yep.
in many parts, not all the parts, but I mean, it's just so great to watch Justin Long be an asshole and get tortured. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'll watch it for Michael Parks alone, so.
Yeah, for me, this is just... I have never quite seen anything like this before. And for all of its faults, I admire it, I appreciate it, I respect Tusk. And I hope that we get more Kevin Smith output like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like if nothing else, this makes you wonder, okay, we'll set aside yoga hosers, but what would Moose Jaw entail, right? Like, I mean, we know the basic premise, which is a moose that is jaws on land. And that sounds wild. If it's like this, then give it to me.
The problem is, I think this movie does a pretty good job of at least like restraining its Canadian humor, but you only really know that once you watch Yoga Hosers.
Right.
Fair point.
And so if this was too much and you watch Yoga Hosers, like, oh my god, Tusk was not that bad. So that absolutely is the case. But nevertheless, it's a carnivorous moose. Like, I want to see this movie.
Right. I mean, I will say, I think one of the reasons that Tusk inherently works is because you don't have to, like, I saw some people describe this as a creature feature online, which I think is fantastic, and I love that. But also, you don't have to animate bad CGI walruses or anything like that. Whereas I think with Moose Jaw, you're gonna have to do some kind of animal effect, and I don't know that he's ever gonna be able to raise the budget to do it well.
Well, the budget for Yoga Hosers was $5 million.
Jesus.
And it made $38,000 in the cinema.
Oh, wow, that's so bad.
It made what it deserved. I mean, so I really want to see carnivorous
moose.
I get upset driving up to Canada because all the like moose crossing signs, like, I consider false advertising because I've never seen one.
Oh my god, Dede, no, you don't. I've only ever seen moose behind like enclosures.
They're huge.
They are so fucking big. It boggles the mind how big they are.
I want to see one. I want my mind to be boggled. But so here's the thing. So if it's truly like Jaws on land and in Canada, presumably, we don't see Bruce. Like, I want to see the moose.
Imagine the opening scene of whatever Moose Jaws is. Like, if he's gonna mimic the opening scene from Jaws, but with a moose.
I hope it's Guy Lapointe driving down like Lachutte's back roads and he just gets decimated by a moose.
I would be really into that.
Well, everyone, send us in your fan theories about Moose Jaws if we will ever get that, because it's been in the works for fucking ever.
Forever, yeah.
And I think because of the very overwhelmingly poor reception for Yoga Hosers, we will never get it. But maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe.
Well, we can hope. But, okay. Before we announce what we're covering next week to close out our Weird Sex Month, Dede, first of all, thank you for coming on to defend and give us a lot of insight about this movie.
Yeah.
Oh, anytime, guys. I've spent so much time thinking about it. I might as well spread that around.
There we go.
And let everyone know, where can they find you on social media?
Oh, sure, yeah. The easiest way to find me is on Twitter, and I'm at Dede Crim. That's DEDECRIM. And I always post links to my reviews, and my Rotten Tomatoes is up on there as well.
There you go. Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers, or shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. Go to our YouTube channel to check out our interviews with various horror filmmakers, as well as our monthly hangouts where we talk about hot-button issues with some of our peers. And if you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook HorrorQueers group. Show us some love by leaving us a review and rating us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. This month we've got episodes on Roxanne Benjamin's There's Something Wrong with the Children, Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool, Elizabeth Banks' Cocaine Bear, and M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin, which will tie into our audio commentary for the month on Shyamalan's very own 2004 polarizing film, The Village.
Just keep adding words.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. But Joe, to close out Weird Sex Month and my birthday episode, kind of on a movie I've only seen once, but felt strongly enough to where I was like, we have to cover this. What are we talking about next week?
Yeah, I love that we had other movies planned, and then you watched this and said, kick something off the schedule. We need to watch Wolf.
This is the Mike Nichols directed Jack Nicholson, Michelle Pfeiffer, James Spader werewolf movie from 1994. Wolf.
Yep, with the astronomically high budget.
$70 million. And if y'all thought this was the epitome of how did this get made, just wait until you watch Wolf.
I guess we will next week.
Yep, but until then, we can cross out Tusk.
Indeed, and cross out horror queers. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go practice my Whistling Walrus.
Oh, no.
Gross.
Atlas Avenue, a long stretch of road that encompasses everything the city of Kennett Heights has to offer. Neon lights, traffic, crime, the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and the craziest of characters. My office was above it all. My name is James Locke, and I'm a PI.
Hello, Mr. J. How the hell you doing today?
Good, Edith. Nearly every year I have a new case. New people to meet, new clues to discover, and new problems to solve. But I do it the old-fashioned way. No technology. Nothing post-1950. Hell, I don't even listen to podcasts, but you should. Atlas Avenue Beat is a spoof of the film noir genre with goofy characters, tons of wordplay, and non-stop raunchy humor. There's also 3 whole seasons out right now with more on the way. Just search for Atlas Avenue Beat wherever you listen to podcasts or visit us online at bloody.fm.